The best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book.
Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read.
Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Yes, hello. This is Nick, creator of Hayes Reviews. Welcome back to another episode of Hayes Reviews, in which we read books and we do it live. So big, sincere thank you to everybody tuning in to watch the live stream tonight. I hope you are all enjoying this Easter time, wherever you are and whatever time it is in the place where you are at. I hope you are healthy and well and enjoying life to the best of your ability, despite all the weird and wonderful things that come at us through our glowing rectangles on a daily basis. Remember, it's just all pixels, a lot of it. You don't have to take it seriously. You don't have to let it rule your life. You do not have to allow that particular configuration of pixels to hold dominion over how you feel and what you do and the quality of your days, okay? Unless, of course, you're watching this particular arrangement of pixels known as Hayes Reviews, in which case maybe you do have to pay attention. But certainly don't let it control the quality of your day. We are just here to educate, to learn, to grow, to explore, to be curious, to find out more about what is going on in the world. And of course, I'm sure if you are tuning in and you've seen previous episodes, you know that, in my opinion, the best way to do that is through reading books. So we're back tonight. We're going to be reading from the book we started last Friday, which is Vernon Coleman's book. It is called Endgame, The Hidden Agenda 21. There it is. There's the front cover. It's got a woman who's wearing some sort of white bin bag running through a forest with no leaves. I'm not quite sure exactly what the front cover has to do with the topic of the book. But all Vernon Coleman's books have interesting front covers. I don't know if it's just stock photo image or whatnot, but anyway, it's irrelevant because it's about what's between the covers that really matters. And that sounded a little bit like an innuendo there, and that's not what I meant at all. I meant the book covers, not the bed covers, you filthy people out there who thought I meant something else. But welcome back. So last week we started reading this book, and we did a preamble ramble looking at Vernon Coleman's Wikipedia page, looking at his website, a few other artifacts as well. And then we started on the book and we read the introduction and the first part of the book. I sent an email to Vernon Coleman to say the video has gone live, and he got back in touch with me to say, great job. You've got a fantastic channel. You don't have to stop at 25% of the book. Please feel free to continue and use the whole book. So that was great news, and I was very happy to receive that email, and we're very blessed that Vernon Coleman is extending his generosity and telling us that we can do a full reading of the book, so we don't have to stop at the quarter point of the book, which is great news. It's very exciting. It means that we're going to have to wait a little bit longer to get on to the next book, which we recently voted on, and we know what the next book is now. But it's all good because this is proving to be an entertaining, uplifting, enlightening, well-researched, accurate, and true to reality type of endeavor. So thank you for being here tonight. We've got Tammy, Elizabeth, David Lees, and we got Frank over on YouTube, Turbs, over on Rumble. Nobody on Odyssey yet, but you never know who could show up there. I've got a fairly packed preamble ramble to get through. So I think we should probably just jump right into it and crack on, because otherwise, who knows, we'll be here late into the wee hours. So let's go over here and have a look. Okay. So the first thing we're going to look at is a Wikipedia page for technocracy. And when I pulled this page up, I was kind of surprised and shocked to find out that I hadn't highlighted this page before. I'd never looked at it in any of the previous readings or live streams. I never looked at this page. And so that took me by surprise. I thought, surely I've looked at this and talked about this at some point. But the reason why I thought it'd be a good place to start for tonight's preamble ramble, and actually we'll go back to the this cam for a second, is because in part one of the book, the introduction here, Vernon Coleman writes the following. Back in 1932, Columbia University in the US backed a new economic system designed by engineers and scientists that was intended to replace free enterprise and indeed capitalism. It was claimed that the system would rescue the whole world. It was called technocracy, and it was, in practice, intended to be the science of social engineering, controlling every aspect of human life. So as I was flicking through the intro and looking at some of the stuff that we read on Friday's live stream for tonight's preamble ramble, I thought technocracy, that's a good place to jump in. Let's learn a little bit about that. And I found some interesting stuff. I've got some books to put on your radar, and that's what we're going to do right now. So technocracy, what is it? What does Wikipedia want to tell us about this particular topic? Well, it's a form of government. And in this form of government, it's left to decision makers who are knowledge experts to decide what's going on and to run things and plan things from the top. And these knowledge experts have expertise in specific domains, which provide them with advice and guidance in various areas of their policymaking responsibilities. It says that technocracy follows largely in the tradition of meritocratic theories, and it works best when the state exerts strong control over social and economic issues, i.e. strong control over the human beings who live in that particular technate. This system is sometimes presented as explicitly contrasting with representative democracy. So if you like your voting, if you like to put an X in a box once every 4 years and you hold that to be a very important ritual which signifies freedom, you might not like technocracy because it is explicitly contrasting with that particular ritual behavior. In a technocracy, decision makers rely on individuals and institutions possessing specialized knowledge and data-based evidence rather than advisors with political affiliations or loyalty. So you see, it's all about the expert, it's specialized knowledge and data-based evidence. Specialized knowledge, this to me makes me think of somebody like a PhD who has a very narrow but deep knowledge into a topic. So instead of having a broad range of knowledge and how all the different things connect together and interlink, somebody becomes a specialist. They know one thing very deeply, but they don't know how that one thing connects to all the other things. So it's sort of like having medical specialists, right? You've got a lung specialist, you've got a kidney specialist, you've got an eye specialist, a brain specialist, but nobody really knows the holistic picture, how those things affect the other parts of the body. We just pull the expert in with that particular tiny field of knowledge when we need them, and we're lacking the bigger picture, the holistic view of things, right? And then the other thing that stands out to me is data-based evidence. So this is the idea that the more data we have, the better decision making we can employ, which is true to an extent, but of course this can be taken to an extreme, and we're sort of living through that now, where every imaginable data point that could be gathered is gathered and harvested, stored, and sold ultimately to advertisers and to corporations and companies, etc. So this is what it's all about. It's specialized knowledge and data-based, data-driven decision making. So the term technocracy was initially used to signify the application of the scientific method to solving social problems. So notice it's the scientific method, which is different to science or scientism or the science. When they say trust the science, believe in the science, follow the science. That's a different thing to saying apply the scientific method, which has a formula, it has a process, it has steps and stages that you have to follow, and it's often the things are often conflated, so that when we say like backed by science, people think it means backed by a scientific method, and therefore it has some weight. But science, quote unquote, science can be fabricated. It can be the papers, the studies can be rigged. They can be the data can be adjusted. The statistics can be altered. The experiments can be planned in such a way as to back up and provide a certain outcome. So scientific method and science, it's just important to disambiguate those terms, right? So using the scientific method to solve social problems might not be a bad thing. And that's kind of what came out to me as I was preparing this preamble ramble, is that the very origins of technocracy, the very early people who came up with it, might have had a point. But more on that in a little bit later. It says here that in its most extreme form, technocracy is an entire government running as a technical or engineering problem and is mostly hypothetical. So they've thrown that bit in there just to say, yeah, it's just a hypothetical system. It's never been used. We never did use it because, we have representative democracy. And so this is just a hypothetical thing that doesn't exist. No need to worry about it. It was some guys 100 years ago, they were going on about it, but it never took root and it never got steam. But I think that's a bit of a misdirection on the part of the Wikipedia editors to say it's mostly hypothetical. A government in which elected officials appoint experts and professionals to administer individual government functions and recommended legislation can be considered technocratic. Okay, so there's a bit of a definition there. That's what needs to happen. And then it also tells us that some uses of the word refer to a form of meritocracy where the ablest are in charge, ostensibly without the influence of special interest groups. I just wanted to draw your attention to the word ostensibly. I like that word. It's a good word. It kind of means, in theory, without the influence of special interest groups. But of course, we all know that special interest groups exist, and they often hold the power and the sway over the way things roll out and what happens in the world, right? So what's the history of the term? Well, it's derived from the Greek words meaning technate, which means skill, and also the word kratos, which means power, as in governance or rule. William Henry Smythe, a California engineer, is usually credited with inventing the word in 1919 to describe the rule of the people made effective through the agency of their servants, the scientists and engineers. Alrighty. So 1919, so this goes back a way, right? Over 100 years, in fact. Now, this always surprises me because I hadn't heard about this word until 2021, maybe sometime 2020, 2021 is the first time I came across technocracy when I was watching various people, James Corbett, Grand Theft World, Richard Grove. I was hearing interviews with Patrick Wood, and he is one of the OGs of research and study of technocracy and the history of it, right? And so I thought, technocracy, wow, it sounds like a new thing because it's to do with technology, and the internet is relatively new, and we haven't had these personal computers and smartphones for very long. It's probably quite a new concept. Nope, it's 100 years old. It goes back to 1919. And I thought this was funny that the servants of the people are the scientists and the engineers. Okay, sure they are. But Smythe also used the term in a 1919 article called Technocracy, Ways and Means to Gain Industrial Democracy, and that was in the journal Industrial Management. So the term industrial democracy stood out to me as well. particularly reminded me of the book Fabian Freeway, which we read on the channel. Specifically, it reminded me of the League for Industrial Democracy, the LID, the LID, which was an organization over in America founded by and driven largely by Fabian socialists, the group who are the subject of the book Fabian Freeway, as well as Milner Fabian Conspiracy. They play a large role in the content of that book as well. We also read that on the channel. So we're starting to see sort of links between industrial democracy, which was kind of a thin rebranding of socialism, or maybe not even a rebranding, but just a disguise, a phrase that was used because socialism, particularly National Socialism, became sour in a lot of people's mouths back in the 1930s. And so they started talking about democracy and industrial democracy and pushing this as their marketing, through their marketing instead, right? So just interesting that technocracy links to industrial democracy and industrial democracy links to socialism, which links to communism. It's all kind of a rebranding of the same system over and over again, just with the tiny parasite class directing it, trying to figure out, okay, how do we brand this? How do we market this to the masses so that they, don't kick up too much of a fuss as we're doing what we do to them? But continuing on. In the 1930s, through the influence of Howard Scott and the technocracy movement, which he founded, the term technocracy came to mean government by technical decision making. So technical decision making. Scott proposed that money would be replaced by energy certificates, denominated in units such as ergs or joules, equivalent in total amount to an appropriate national net energy budget, and then distributed equally among the North American population according to resource availability. So part of technocracy is the replacing of money, the removal of the fiat money system, and putting energy certificates in place of that. So instead of spending pounds and shekels and dollars and euros, which are just printed out of thin air, these days you just slap a keyboard and poof, money is magically created. Instead of that, it's all to do with energy and energy usage and energy production and having a quota of the energy. And we'll learn a little bit more about that later, but that's a key aspect of this as well. So continuing says, there is in common usage found the derivative term technocrat. The word technocrat can refer to someone exercising governmental authority because of their knowledge, quote, a member of a powerful technical elite, or someone who advocates the supremacy of technical experts. So a technocrat is saying, you're all too dumb to make decisions for yourselves. We need some experts to do it. And or somebody coming out and saying, you're all too dumb to make decisions for yourselves, therefore I'm going to make the decisions for you. Okay? So there is a lot of different ways where you could become a technocrat. But it's this when you advocate the normal, everyday Joe and Jane on the street as being too ill-informed, too uninformed, too inexpert to drive the decisions that affect them in their lives and their communities and their families. Nope, we need somebody who's been trained, who's got all the knowledge, who's got all the information, and they're going to make the decisions for you on your behalf because you are incapable of doing it. That's what's kind of implied with this idea of a technocratic sort of elite. So, precursors to technocracy. This is a good section as well. So before the term technocracy was coined, technocratic or quasi-technocratic ideas involving governance by technical experts were promoted by various individuals, most notably early socialist theorists, such as Henri de Saint-Simon. So it was most noticeably pushed by socialists. This was expressed by the belief in state ownership over the economy, with the state's function being transformed from pure philosophical rule over men into a scientific administration of things and a direction of production processes under scientific management. So notice what is not there is anything to do with morality, with anything to do with well-being, maximizing, I don't know, happiness or freedom. There's nothing there about freedom or improving it or increasing it for people. Just scientific management. So this is a very kind of left-brained materialist view of things, whereby there are atoms and elements and biological reactions and chemicals, and they're all bashing together, and that's what creates reality. And there's nothing sort of spiritual. There is no kind of unseen dimension to what's going on. It is all measurable and trackable and traceable, and therefore all that data can be harvested and fed into some sort of decision-making process, and that will lead us with our perfect scientific society. Bell concludes that the administration of things by rational judgment is the hallmark of technocracy. So it's this deification of rationality, of reason above all. Moving on to Alexander Bogdanov. Bogdanov was concerned that a coming revolution against capitalism could lead to a technocratic society. So again, technocracy stands in contrast to democracy and also capitalism, because as I mentioned before, they wanted to take money out of the picture. From 1913 to 1922, Bogdanov immersed himself in writing a lengthy philosophical treatise of original ideas called Technology, Universal Organization Science. Technology anticipated many basic ideas of systems analysis, later explored by cybernetics, which we have talked about on this channel before. Norbert Wiener being one of the original sort of creators and people responsible for popularizing cybernetics, which, as you can see here, is we have talked about it before, but cybernetics is the guy who, just to give you a sort of reminder or a clue if you're not familiar with the term, Norbert Wiener came up with cybernetics. He wrote the book on it, literally, but then he had a bit of an about face. He had a bit of a crisis of conscience, and he ended up writing a book called Human Use of Human Beings. And that title tells you a lot about where this whole discipline and study is really going. And then a little more on the history here of technocracy. The Platonic idea of philosopher kings represents a sort of technocracy. And so Platonic meaning Plato. He advocated in his book, The Republic, that a small handful of philosopher kings should run everything. And there would be this hierarchical society with philosopher kings at the top. And this was a kind of technocratic society, because the state is run by those with specialist knowledge. In this case, knowledge of the good rather than scientific knowledge. So it's interesting that at least the Platonic version of this talked about good, what is moral, what is right, what is just. But by the time they're sort of rediscovering technocracy over 100 years ago in 1919 and the 20s and 30s, they kind of ditched all the moral stuff. Oh, we're not worried about what's good, what's right, what's correct, what's proper, what's decent, what's just, what's honorable. Ditch all that stuff. That's all kind of, unmeasurable and unquantifiable. What we'll just go for is, scientific knowledge. How do things work? How do you bash things down and cut them up and understand how they work, right? The Platonic claim is that those who best understand goodness should be empowered to lead the state as they would lead it toward the path of happiness. Again, just contrasting with the more modern version of technocracy. So what are the characteristics? Well, technocrats are individuals with technical training and occupations who perceive many important societal problems as being solvable with the applied use of technology and related applications. So basically, people who see a problem and then think, do you know what? We need an app to solve that. There's an app for that, which is kind of where we're at now, right? Everything can be solved if we just have a gadget, a gizmo, a doohickey, a little object that has buttons that does a thing. When we press it, it makes a sound, a picture comes up, whatever. That'll solve all our problems. So nothing to do with like inner work, Nothing to do with shadow work, with understanding one's own psychological profile and makeup, diving into one's history, maybe resolving trauma, maybe some sort of analysis of one's self, or the psychology and the dynamics of interpersonal relationships as found in families or organizations or communities, etc. Nah, we'll build a gadget, we'll track everything, we'll feed all that data into an algorithm, and the algorithm will tell us what to do. So you can see the parallels with where we are currently at in history, right? So there's some examples here. Oh, I just skipped over a little bit here, which was the administrative scientist Gunnar K.A. Jalson theorizes that technocrats are primarily driven by their cognitive problem solution mindsets. But of course, the thing is that age-old adage, when you have a hammer, every problem is a nail. And I think that is very appropriate in this particular instance. When you are really into your toys and your gadgets and your gizmos, then every problem that you encounter is going to be solved by more technology, isn't it? But some real-world examples. So remember this bit at the beginning where it says, mostly hypothetical. Mostly hypothetical. Mostly, for the most part. And then down here at the examples section. First example is the former government of the Soviet Union has been referred to as a technocracy. And I like the way they cast the doubt as the way they word it. Has been referred to, not is or was a technocracy, or was based on technocratic ideals, or was a great example of technocracy in action. No, just has been referred to. Oh, well, by who, I wonder. They don't tell you by who. You can look it up, I suppose. There is a footnote here if you want to follow that. It's actually Lauren Graham, who's written The Ghost of the Executed Engineer, Technology in the Fall of the Soviet Union. So that sounds pretty academic. Also, in 1986, it tells us 89% of Politburo members were engineers back in the Soviet Union. So that tells you a great deal about the kind of people who want to bring a technocracy into reality. Also, we got leaders of the Chinese Communist Party, used to be professional engineers, mostly. It has been found that over 80% of government personnel had a technical education in Chinese cities with a population of 1 million or more. So technocracy, you're looking at socialism, you're looking at getting rid of any kind of voting system, any sort of participatory politics, and you're looking at a whole lot of death if the examples are anything to go by. Excuse me. In 2013, this bit's really interesting. A European Union library briefing on its legislative structure referred to the Commission as, and that's the European Commission, as a technocratic authority holding a legislative monopoly over the EU lawmaking process. What? Are you incredulous when you hear that? Because I was. So I looked up the footnote, and there's a document. And it's right here. Library briefing, Library of the European Parliament, 24th of October 2013. First page. It is suggested that the EC, the European Commission's initiative monopoly, was originally rooted in the mistrust of the political process in post-war Europe. As a consequence, European integration and the identification of the general interest of the communities were entrusted to a technocratic authority. But they're mostly hypothetical. Technocracy is mostly hypothetical. So there you are. The European Commission is a technocratic authority, or at least the crazy conspiracy theorists in the European Union library think so. So continuing, it says several governments in European parliamentary democracies have been labeled technocratic. See, it always says have been labeled or have been referred to. Has been referred to as technocracy, have been labeled technocratic, never admitting that, yes, that is what they are, that is the system we're living under, these are the ideals and the goals and the motivations of the people who are, barreling us forward into the system that they are designing. But several governments have been labelled technocratic based on the participation of unelected experts. Since the 1990s, Italy has had several such governments. Also, there's an example of the Syrian Salvation Government was characterized as an authoritarian technocracy. And there's an article called Technocrats, Minds Like Machines, which describes how Singapore is perhaps the best advertisement for technocracy. So don't worry about all these terrible examples, the Soviet Union, the CCP, Syria. Don't worry about them, because look, it's working in Singapore, therefore it must be a great idea. Let's have more of that. So, moving on. Technocracy movement. So this is when we get into a little bit more detail about the history and the origin and who was involved and what kind of people they were. The American economist and sociologist Thorstein Veblen was an early advocate of technocracy and was involved in the Technical Alliance, as were Howard Scott and M. King Hubbert. Veblen believed technological developments would eventually lead to a socialistic reorganization of economic affairs. So there's that word again, socialism and socialistic. Very closely tied to the origins of the technocracy movement. Then in 1932, we've got Howard Scott and Marion King Hubbert. They found the Technocracy Incorporated, which was a corporation, obviously, and they proposed that money be replaced by energy certificates. The technocracy movement was briefly popular in the US in the early 1930s during the Great Depression. By the mid-1930s, interest in the movement was declining. Some historians have attributed this decline to the rise in Roosevelt's New Deal. Critiques of technocracy. It says, technocracy privileges the opinions and viewpoints of technical experts, exalting them to a kind of aristocracy while marginalizing the opinions and viewpoints of the general public, right? So instead of having a royal family, exalted above everybody else, instead of having a group of men and women who call themselves a government, exalted, now you have a group of technical experts, exalted and above and beyond the general public. So same hierarchical pyramid type structure and system, just with a different clique at the top. So there's a bit here about a 1982 journal article called Technology and Culture from the magazine, the journal Technology and Culture, which states, the technocratic image and the theory of technocracy. That's the name of the article. John G. Gunnell writes, quote, politics is increasingly subject to the influence of technological change, with specific reference to the advent of the long boom and the genesis of the internet following the 1973-75 recession. Gunnell adds 3 levels of analysis that delineate technology's political influence. One is political power tends to gravitate towards technological elites. 2, technology has become autonomous and thus impenetrable by political structures. And 3, technology and science constitute a new legitimizing ideology, as well as triumphing over tribalism and nationalism, the crusading spirit in religion, bigotry, censorship, racism, persecution, immigration and emigration restrictions, tariffs, and chauvinism. So there you are. Technology is the panacea to all the main problems and all the world's woes. Technology and technocracy. But 40 years after the publication of Gunnell's writings, technology and government have become, for better or for worse, increasingly intertwined. Yeah, slightly. I would say that is, it's kind of painted here as accidental, but I think it's totally on purpose. Facebook can be considered a technocratic microcosm, a technocratic nation state with a cyberspatial population that surpasses any terrestrial nation. In a broader sense, critics fear that the rise of social media networks, coupled with the decline in mainstream engagement, imperil the networked young citizen to inconspicuous coercion and indoctrination by algorithmic mechanisms. That is actually a valid concern. The networked young citizen is definitely being indoctrinated by algorithmic mechanisms. Then we've also got reference to an article here by Matthew Cole, who argues that technocracy excludes citizens from policymaking processes while advantaging elites. So, no surprises there. And just say hello to the Outsiders Outlier over on Odyssey. How are you doing? Hope you are having a good evening. Thanks for hanging out. We got Anna M as well over on YouTube. What's up? What's up? So, technocracy, as described by Wikipedia, I think it's a reasonably fair and even representation. Some of the suggested reading at the bottom here is quite interesting as well. You've got algocracy, which is government by algorithm. James Corbett did a great video on this very topic recently. You've got bright green environmentalism, which I didn't get a chance to look at, but I want to, and I might do on a future Preamble Ramble, because it's particularly relevant to the topic of Endgame, which is Agenda 21. There's post-politics, so entering into an era where politics is abandoned. I mean, at the point we're at right now, politics is quite clearly a sort of pantomime, but a lot of people still believe in it, and so they keep playing the show, you know, and getting you to put your ex in a box every 4 years, as though it makes any difference. But at some point, they'll abandon that whole rigmarole, I think. Scientific communism is another, probably a synonym, I would guess, for technocracy. It sort of ties in very nicely, and it's another way to describe what the system kind of really does. And then you've got your scientocracy and your scientism, which, as I mentioned, is very important if you're going to have a system that is run by data gathering and not the scientific method, but the science. It becomes the new authority, right? So in the past, you had a priest class and they would tell you that God says you must ... Now it's science says you must ... And that might be take a certain medical procedure, put a certain thing on your face wherever you go, behave in a certain way, stand a certain distance from other people, queue, submit to tracking, tracing, databasing, scanning QR codes, all this other stuff that science told us to do over the last 5 years. That would be a scientific scientocracy. And then techno-populism as well is another one that stood out to me and I thought would be interesting to look at and read more about. But moving on, we had a look at this library briefing. And I should mention as well, and I think I forgot to mention, that I'll have a pinned comment below the video with all the links and timestamps if you want to jump ahead and you're watching this on the replay. But if you recall from that last article, Howard Scott was a name that came up, and he was an American engineer, and he was the founder of the technocracy movement. So it started with this guy, and he formed the Technical Alliance and also Technocracy Incorporated with their nifty yin-yang logo there, and that color looks suspiciously like the color used in the Hayes Reviews logo. That's a total coincidence and accident, honest. But let's learn a little bit more about Howard Scott, born on April Fool's Day in 1890. So, Howard Scott's early life. Little is known about Scott's background or his early life, and he has been described as a mysterious young man. It says that in 1918, shortly before the end of World War I, Scott appeared in New York City. Poof, just appeared. You know, he actually looks a bit like a magician with that big overcoat. It kind of like, it looks sort of like a cape. But yeah, he just appeared out of nowhere, and mysteriously, he just, I don't know, like assembled himself. Maybe he phased in from another dimension. Maybe he beamed himself here from aboard some sort of orbiting space station. But he appeared in New York City. And then he worked in some construction camps, and he picked up some engineering experience on the job. So, you know, there's a bit more about his background and all that interesting. He worked in a few different places. But then this section is the influence on the IWW. So what is the IWW? It's the Industrial Workers of the World organization, and it's still going to this day. It was founded in 1905. It's one of the biggest sort of international labor unions that exists. Apparently, their nickname is the Wobblies. And it says on the Wikipedia page, nobody knows really where that name came from, but they are the Wobblies. And Mr. Scott had an impact on the Wobblies, which is described here. Scott was queried by a few gentlemen looking for research to be done. It's unknown as to whom exactly suggested they contact Scott. So that tells us nothing really. But he agreed and he started doing their research, and it turned out to be about copper consumption for a potential copper industry strike. And Scott wasn't aware that these gentlemen who hired him were Industrial Workers of the World members. So again, it's tying into the Fabian Socialists. The movement started in Britain at the end of the 1800s and then slowly expanded out into America by way of influential writers such as Bernard Shaw, such as H.G. Wells. That whole story is a very interesting one, and it's told on in the Fabian Freeway reading, which is on the playlists if you need some more background on that, but very closely intertwined with the origins of technocracy. And so it turned out that this research they wanted Scott to carry out was about a strike and how best they could carry out the strike, I suppose, to do the most harm and damage to get what they wanted. And we have a bit of information here. So continuing, according to Ralph Chaplin, who met Scott in Greenwich Village and was invited to his studio, Chaplin and Scott discussed the improvement of the IWW to better help a worker revolution, and Scott was said to have made some impressive points, insisting that the revolutionary force will be with engineers. So it's starting to highlight the importance of an engineering mindset, of looking at things mechanistically, of seeing the cause and effect in very material terms and not taking into account anything deeper or beyond or unmeasurable, such as the spiritual realm, right? They also talked about Thorsten Veblen's Soviet of Engineers. Scott was dissatisfied with Veblen's use of the word Soviet. He probably thought that was a bit too on the nose. Chaplin spoke of IWW's need to have organized information. Scott suggested an industrial research bureau, explaining the importance of having all the data for an informed decision. So I'm as far as I'm concerned, my opinion of this character is kind of, I'm not quite sure. I sometimes I read stuff about him, I think he means well, and he came from a good place, and he was actually, his criticism was legitimate, and actually he was a bit of a threat to the powers that be back then, right? But at the same time, he's also pushing for this glorification of reason and rationality and data collection and data gathering. So kind of a double-edged thing. But continuing, in 1920, during a wobbly convention, which is a great title for a convention, a wobbly convention, presumably like all the tables and chairs have uneven legs and nobody's just sitting stationary, or they're all like getting hammered and just wobbling their way around all the time. But anyway, regardless, during a wobbly convention, the IWW made an official Bureau of Industrial Research. So Scott suggested this, and then it happened. And then he was hired as a research director of the Bureau of Industrial Research for the International Workers of the World. Sorry, Industrial Workers of the World. And that Industrial Workers of the World ties in with what we learned about communism and socialism in the Fabian Freeway readings, which is that actually it's baked into both of those things that the end goal is a worldwide system. So people who were advancing that and teaching it and propagandizing people to go along with it, they knew that the end goal was going to be this like top-down worldwide system. And you can see it in the logo right there, right? It's a world with a kind of cage or net or just these partitions, these divisions over it. The symbols and the logos often reveal quite a lot, but they had their eye on bringing into they had their eye on building a worldwide system from the get-go, in other words. But Howard Scott, He's working with the, let's just call them the Fabian Socialists, as a research director. And then he became the chief advocate of technocracy across North America when the Bureau of Industrial Research became inactive. And this is when he got into his technocracy. So Scott, together with Walter Rautenstrauch, formed the Committee on Technocracy in 1932. So this date aligns very nicely with Vernon Coleman's introduction and what he writes in the book here, which is good. And this Committee on Technocracy advocated a more rational and productive society headed by technical experts. Okay, so everyone's irrational. You know, they're all praying and believing in God and spirits and judgment on their souls. And these that's very irrational. We need to only take notice of things that we can measure. And we need to be more productive. We need to produce more because people are just sitting around, relaxing, enjoying their lives, spending time with their loved ones, and this will not do. We need more production, damn it. And the committee disbanded in 1933 after a few months because of differences between Scott and Rautenstrauch. And Scott was widely criticized. It doesn't say why, who by, or what for, but this is a theme that comes up again and again, is that Scott suddenly becomes the subject of a lot of criticism. Apparently, Scott had, quote, overstated his academic credentials. That's a quote that comes from a 1992 MIT Press, maybe article. And he was discovered not to be a distinguished engineer. So to me, it's weak, right? So, okay, he overstated his academic credentials. By how much and in what way? You know, did he say he worked somewhere for 15 years and it actually was only 14 years? Big deal. Who cares? Oh, he's not a distinguished engineer. Well, what's the definition of distinguished? Right? Oh, you don't actually, you're not as known as we thought you were. So therefore, we're not going to listen to you and we're going to turn on you. So to me, I start to smell at this point a bit of like Scott is almost recognized as a bit of a threat and needs to have his reputation sort of poo-pooed. That's the kind of way I'm reading it, but this bit kind of explains, helps understand, which is that on January 13th, 1933, Scott gave a speech about technocracy at the Hotel Pierre. And this had a live audience of 400, and it was also broadcast on radio nationwide. Okay? And what happened? The speech was called a grave mistake, disastrous, and a complete failure. Because Scott probably had no experience or training as a public speaker. So this is leaving you with the impression that he spoke a lot of nonsense. All his ideas were a lot of hogwash, and it was just a total it should never have happened. But it doesn't actually get to the meat or the content of what he said. It doesn't tell you, and it doesn't tell you what the ideas he presented were, why they were considered disastrous, why a failure, why a grave mistake. Instead, it just gives you these quotes, and there are some footnotes here, but they're recent. And who's saying these things and for what reason? Like, for example, if you stand up and you give a speech calling out let's just say the New World Order or the things we're living through right now, people might say, oh, that's the mainstream defenders of what's going on, the defenders of the system and the structure of society as it is, might call your speech a disaster and a failure and a grave mistake. You see what I'm getting at? It's like these criticisms here don't tell you about they're not a critique of the content of the speech, in other words. So maybe he wasn't the best speaker. Maybe he stumbled his way through it, or he read from some little cards like, the king formerly known as Prince does when he does speeches. What happened in order to merit this sort of feedback is the question. And I don't know. I can't find a recording of this speech. All I can find is videos of AI voices reading the text of it, and the text, the PDF that I found looked to be a Word document. So I don't know. I don't even know if the text that I found of the speech is accurate or not. So it seems to me like there might have been a little bit of memory hole work here on this man and this particular speech. But I didn't, I'm not a sleuth. I'm not an internet sleuth. I'm not really good at getting into the recesses and digging up the hidden stuff. So if anyone else can find maybe either, I mean, it was broadcast on radio nationwide. You would think there'd be a recording somewhere, right? Maybe, I don't know. But anyway, it didn't go down well. Whatever he said, it didn't go down well, and they don't want you, and they want you to think that this was a total abortion of a speech and not to look into it any further. That's the feeling I get. So the genesis of the technocratic movement, M. King Hubbert joins the staff of Columbia University and meets Howard Scott in 1931. So that aligns with what Vernon Coleman writes in Endgame. And they co-founded Technocracy Incorporated in 1933. And Scott remained as the chief engineer until his death in 1970. Scott, quote, argued indefatigably that scientific analysis of industrial production would show the path to lasting efficiency and unprecedented abundance. And that's a key part of this. What Scott was trying to bring into reality was abundance. He was trying to, based on my reading of this, I don't know the guy personally or any of his family. I haven't read any of his books or his first-hand works, but wanting to bring unprecedented, you never hear about abundance, right? You never hear that our quote-unquote elites, the people running the show, they're never shooting for abundance. They're never shooting for, hey, we want to get everyone out of work and automate all the production, and then everyone can just kick back and enjoy themselves and make sure everyone's got enough. No, there's this like scarcity maintained, this artificial scarcity, and this competitive class sort of, not exactly class warfare, but this competition between people, whereby you always got to be getting more and moving up and getting your promotion and buying a bigger house and buying a bigger car, et cetera, et cetera. And it's that rat race type of competitive system that is perpetuated instead of shooting for a system of abundance, which the earth could quite easily provide, enough for everybody, no problem, on a sustainable basis as well. But that's never the true goal, so it's never really talked about. And that word abundance stood out to me when I was doing this, going through this stuff earlier. And so radical reform, Technocracy Incorporated, formed in 1931, promoted Howard Scott's ideas. What were these ideas? Well, he called for the price system and fiat currencies to be replaced. Okay, now we might be getting a bit of a clue as to why his speech has been buried and why it's been so slandered, right? He's calling for fiat currencies to be replaced. He's like, get rid of the banks and the bankers and the banking families and this funny money that you just print out of thin air. Let's ditch all of that. And you know what happens if you go against that system? Well, if you are on the Titanic, you certainly find out, allegedly, as legend has it. But he called for the price system and fiat currencies to be replaced with a system based on energy. And he also called for engineers to run a continental government, which he termed a technate, to optimize the use of energy to assure abundance. And there's the word again. And then it says, virtually unknown today, the organization boasted over 500,000 members in California alone in the 30s and 40s. So there's kind of utopian ideals here wrapped up in this first iteration of technocratic movement, but it's virtually unknown today. Why is that? Is that because there was some good ideas there at the very beginning? Is that why it's been buried and not spoken about, and why I never heard the word technocracy until like 3 or 4 years ago? That's kind of what I'm starting to think, and what I need to do more learning, of course, but that's sort of the way it looks if you read between the lines. And so here I found a human being reading the text of Howard Scott's Hotel Pierre address. It's 46 minutes long. I'm not going to play it now, but here it is, right? It's Roger Lewis's YouTube channel. And as I said before, the text, the actual electronic file, that looks to me just like a Word document. I mean, I could have typed that. So how legitimate this particular text is, I don't know. And I would love to know. I would love if somebody out there can find a first-hand primary source of the contents of this speech, and especially recording. I mean, there's all these pictures there, right? it was broadcast nationally, it would be great if there was a primary source of this speech to get its contents. But until that surfaces and somebody finds it, then we got Roger Lewis reading through this Word document, which alleges to be the full text of the hotel, of Howard Scott's Hotel Pierre address. So I'll link that underneath as well for anybody who's interested. And then there's another page here that I wanted to go through called Technocracy Movement. So we've been through, this is the first one we looked at was technocracy. And then there's this other page, which is Technocracy Movement. And I thought, oh, that's curious. And this one actually gives you way more interesting information and useful information as to the origins and the ideas and the thinking and the philosophy and that actually were there at the beginning of Technocracy Movement. So what does this page say? It says that historians associate the movement with Howard Scott's Technical Alliance and Technocracy Incorporated prior to the internal factionalism that dissolved the organization during the Second World War. So this was another curious thing to look at, is that it didn't last very long, and there was an internal factionalism which led to the sort of which led to it going nowhere, and that happened during the Second World War. There seems to be one faction inside the Technology Incorporated that were against the war, and then another faction that were pro-war. That's what it seems to me, reading between the lines. But, divide and conquer. If you've got a group and they're gaining traction and they've just had a guy on the radio speaking to the whole nation saying, hey, we get rid of these central banks, get rid of this fiat currency, we can bring in a better system, we can go for abundance, we've got that, we were aiming for that, that's what we want to do. What do? You infiltrate the group, you sow some discord, discontent, you pay somebody to kick up a fuss about an issue that's not even related to the purpose of the group, and then you divide people, and then boom, you have rendered that group ineffective. It happens time and time again throughout history. Classic divide and conquer tactics. So it sounds to me like the technocracy movement fell prey to this very strategy. But continuing, the movement was committed to abstaining from all partisan politics and communist revolution. So they weren't getting involved in the pot. They were saying, let's do away with this bogus political left-right, blue team, red team system, right? Let's get rid of that. We don't want a communist revolution either. We want abundance for everybody. Can't have that. We want to get rid of the central banks. No, we can't have that. It gained strength in the 30s, and in 1940, due to opposition to the Second World War, it was banned in Canada. So it became illegal to be a technocrat in Canada. So you don't want the young men of your country to be sent off to be slaughtered. Well, that is a position that is not allowed in Canada. You have to be pro sacrifice the young men. If you're not pro sacrifice the young men, then get out of here. Canada doesn't want you. But in 1943, the ban was lifted when it was apparent that Technocracy Inc. was committed to the war effort. Oh, so just three years later, and Technocracy Inc. is now proposing a program of total conscription. So that's quite an about turn, isn't it? That's quite an about face to go from against it to total conscription. I mean, that to me reads like, let's sacrifice everybody. Let's chuck as many people as possible into the meat grinder. So something happened between 1940 and 1943. Very interesting. So continuing, the technocracy movement survived into the 21st century, and as of 2013 was continuing to publish a newsletter and maintain a website and hold meetings. So it's still going. Overview. The coming of the Great Depression ushered in radically different ideas of social engineering, culminating in reforms introduced by the New Deal. By late 1932, various groups across the United States were calling themselves technocrats and proposing reforms. So you had the Great Depression, and of course, this incredibly difficult time. People want to know why it happened. People start looking into it. People start figuring out why it happened. Manufactured and allowed to happen, of course, like all these events always are. And there would have been a very strong motivation for people to say, right, we want something else. We want reforms. And they started organizing, and the Technocracy Incorporated group were capturing those hearts and minds and saying, let's shoot for abundance. Let's fix things. Let's do it differently. Let's get rid of, these the politics and the bankers, and let's do it this way. And so, of course, they had to be infiltrated and broken apart, right? And here's a book you might want to have a look at: Technocracy and the American Dream, The Technocrat Movement, 1900 to 1941, by William E. Aiken. And I think the next tab here, that's not the tab thing, is it? This is the tab thing. No, we'll come back to that. Just park that for a minute. I have another tab on it coming up. But this book we're gonna mention that again in a minute. But that's referenced quite heavily by Patrick Wood in his outstanding book, Technocracy Rising. And it's also mentioned in a lot of the Wikipedia articles here dealing with this topic. But that's William E. Aiken. And let's see, does it tell us when it was published? Yes, 1978. So the origins of the technocratic movement. It tells us again that it's the progressive engineers of the early 20th century, and it also mentions the writings of Edward Bellamy, who we talked about. He wrote a utopian novel called Looking Backward. There it is, Looking Backward. And this was this was written from the point of view of a guy who fell asleep and woke up in the year 2000, and all the problems have been solved by socialism. And this book is taken as a kind of piece of propaganda that is pro-socialism. So it's interesting that he's been also linked into the origins of this movement. Then we got United States and Canada, which seems to be where this thing really got its start. And a reminder that the core of Scott's vision was an energy theory of value. What was also interesting, though, is that the people who joined Technocracy Incorporated, they wore a uniform. And it was consisted of a well-tailored, double-breasted suit, grey shirt, and blue necktie with a monad insignia on the lapel. And Scott was saluted in public. So, I mean, that maybe it's good that they got infiltrated and broken apart before it could gather steam, right? Because being saluted in public and having a uniform, we all know where what people in uniforms tend to do. They tend to crack skulls and follow orders and cause all kinds of chaos, pain, suffering, and so on, right? So maybe it's good that this thing got abandoned early on. But public interest in technocracy peaked in the 30s. Technocracy's heyday lasted from June the 16th, 1932, when the New York Times became the first influential press organ to report its activities, all the way up until January 13 the following year, when Scott, attempting to silence his critics, delivered what some critics called a confusing and uninspiring address on a well-publicized nationwide radio hookup. So again, they're saying that, what he said was confusing and uninspiring. And that was only some critics who said that. So what about the rest of the critics? What about, did this resonate with some people? Were there some people being like, holy crap, he really got an important message out there. He was really waking people up. I don't know. I'm sort of guessing. Following Scott's radio address at the Hotel Pierre, the condemnation of him and technocracy in general reached a peak. So he did something to upset somebody. The press and business people reacted with ridicule. The press and business people. Okay, so who are the press and business people? They're the people most invested in the system. They're benefiting from the system as it is. They don't want it to change. They don't want it to go away. They don't want their lucrative jobs and contracts and cushy lives as board members in their big houses and their holidays and all that stuff to go away. They like being at a certain rung on the ladder, right, with a bunch of people below them they can boss around and et cetera, et cetera. So it sounds like the people who benefit most from the system were tearing down Howard Scott's speech. That's the way I'm kind of reading it. Unanimous hostility. When there's unanimous hostility, that tells you something. The American Engineering Council charged the technocrats with, quote, unprofessional activity, questionable data, and drawing unwarranted conclusions. How dare you? In the end, critics believed that the socially desirable goals the technology made possible could be achieved without the sacrifice of existing institutions. And there, I think, is probably the crux of the matter. I think we had Howard Scott was probably a big gung-ho, being like, we can get rid of all these institutions. They're a lot of nonsense. They're ripping people off. They're extorting people. These are the source of all the failures in society, the hardship, the economic struggle that we're all going through. Ditch them. We can build a better system and have abundance for everybody. And they're all like, you know, doing the Bill Hicks bit, like, shut him up. We got a lot invested in this ride. That's what it sounds like to me. This bit was interesting. On October the 7th, and this is a very relevant, and this ties it into the present day. On October the 7th, 1940, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police arrested members of Technocracy Incorporated, charging them with belonging to an illegal organization, which is a ridiculous charge, isn't it? Like, I mean, they should have just thrown their Technocracy membership cards away, you know, before the police got up to them, and then, but you belong to an organization. Anyway, continuing, one of the arrested was Joshua Norman Halderman, a Regina chiropractor, former director of Technocracy Incorporated, and the maternal grandfather of Elon Musk. Yes, that's right. Elon Musk's maternal grandfather was the director of Technocracy Incorporated and a chiropractor. And he was arrested in 1940 for belonging to an illegal organization. So that bit got me very interested, and I decided to do a little bit of reading about Joshua Norman Halderman, which is coming up. I might have to speed things along a little bit because we're at 7:15 already. But there's a lot of stuff here on this Technocracy. And remember, this is the Technocracy Movement page, not the Technocracy page, which you'll get first. So go to Technocracy Movement, and it tells you a little more about the way they wanted to reform the price system. This bit stood out to me, is worth mentioning. They created a calendar. They wanted to reform the work schedule. So you know that like 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, 2 days off of the weekend pattern of work that everybody hates because everyone loves a 4-day weekend or a 3-day weekend. Everyone loves, like, nobody likes 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. Now, of course, people say, well, in the past it used to be Monday to Sunday, 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. And we've got the Fabian Socialists to thank for the shorter working weeks and the fact that you only have to work 40 hours now. Okay, granted, there was some progress. But there could be more progress, i.e. what the technocrats came up with, which was, according to the movement's calculations, so that's the technocrat movement's calculations, it would be enough that every citizen worked a cycle of 4 consecutive days, 4 hours a day, followed by 3 days off. I'm in. I'm sold. Sign me up. That sounds fantastic to me. It says, by tiling the days and working hours of 7 groups, industry and services could be operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and the system would include holiday periods allocated to each citizen. Doesn't that sound nice? Because I think people don't have a problem chipping in to get things done. People like to be useful. They like to help each other. They like to participate. But a lot of the work, quote unquote work, that goes on these days, as I've said on a previous podcast, a previous episode, I think last week even, is just a lot of unnecessary digital bureaucracy, and nothing's being produced. Our roads are falling apart. Our services are getting worse. The products on the supermarket shelves are full of poison. The prices are going up. Things are getting bad economically and culturally because there's tensions brewing on all manner of divides. Meanwhile, so many of us are just sitting at home, slapping our keyboards, pushing pixels around all day long and producing nothing of value. And that's taking up 40, 50, 60 hours of our week in some cases, when there's real problems out there that actually need to be fixed, that are going unaddressed and unignored and are metastasizing like a cancerous tumor, and it will eventually like affect us when it's on our doorstep, you know? So I say all that because I like the idea of this technocratic calendar. 4 days a week, 4 hours a day. Sign me up. So going down here, there's more information about the benefits of an energy-based system instead of fiat currency. That's pretty interesting. And there's a list here of the differences between the monetary system and the energy accounting system. So it's a I'm not saying 100% this is a much better system, let's go for it, sign me up, because actually there's aspects of it that I don't like, which we are actually getting, right? So let's go through these. It's worth going through it, actually. So technocrats held that the differences between energy accounting and monetary systems are: 1, equal allotments of energy. 2, citizens cannot trade or give away certificates. They can only spend energy at verified vendors. So this is your programmable money, right? This is like, you can only spend it where we say you can spend it, and only you can spend your allotted energy certificates. You can't give them to your buddy, your children. You know, your grandparents can't give their energy certificates to their grandchildren as a little treat. You get it, and if you don't spend it, it's use it or lose it. If you don't lose it, you don't spend it. It says, once a purchase is made at a vendor, the energy used is void. The vendor does not gain the used energy. Therefore, there is no circulation of energy or hoarding of energy. The certificates have an expiration date, and certificates are directly tied to an individual's ID. So a lot of this stuff is coming. It's in the pipeline. Or the biggest banking organizations, IMF, World Bank, BIS, etc., they're all working on this stuff. You bet it. You better believe it. And it's coming. Now, this is where I think technocracy is. The ideas they came up with were gathered, harvested, and then rolled out. Not by the people who originally came up with it, the people who were looking to institute a system of abundance for everybody, but by the people who were like, no, we want to stay in control of this. We want our legacy institutions to remain powerful, all-encompassing, and we're going to fold in the ideas of this technocratic movement, Technocracy Incorporated. We'll fold in some of their ideas to our own benefit as we see fit. So that's kind of how it's looking and sounding to me, anyway. There's a little bit here as well about computerization that's kind of interesting, and a mention of the IBM computers, which is always worth dwelling on, because IBM, as we know, provided the holorith machines, the punch card tabulators, which were used by the tiny mustache man and his goose-stepping Hugo Boss wearing acolytes. So it's always worth mentioning that and reminding people that the book on that is IBM and the Holocaust by Edwin Black. It's a really good book. I reviewed it on the channel, so you can go and check that out if you want to. There's a little bit more about how the Earth would be organized into technates. But yeah, it's pretty, it's a good article. We get a lot of information on this one. A lot of pictures. Always good to have some pictures. And then there's a little thing about the differences between technocracy and socialism here. This bit I liked. It says, by definition of what the technocrat theorists argued, technocracy hasn't truly been implemented. And I like this because it happens time and time again, right? You've got people like, no, communism is the way. What about all those times in the past where it led to mass starvation and slaughter of lots of innocent people? Well, that wasn't proper communism. And then you got other people being like, capitalism is the way. And it's like, yeah, but what about all the monopolists and the system that we live in right now? Well, it's not pure capitalism. And then the same thing with technocracy. You get technocracy is the way. And then like, but the true pure version of it has never been implemented. It's funny that, isn't it? All these isms, all these different systems, great in theory. What's going on in the actual world? What are we seeing? What are we living under? It's the same system that we've always been living under. This tiny parasitical elite they're creating the culture, they're handing it to us, they're creating the systems, they're making the rules, they are threatening, coercing, bullying us into compliance. They are mind controlling us into giving our consent, right? Because we don't have to consent. We have free will. We can say no. We can take a leaf out of Rage Against the Machine's book and say, fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. Not that I advocate or think Rage Against the Machine are good people, because they did require a COVID-19 injection proof to attend that concert. So I think there were sellouts in that respect. But that one lyric is a very good one to bear in mind and to have in your back pocket, maybe minus the expletive, and just say, no, I won't do what you tell me. Or even just no. That is also possible, and you can do that. So all of these systems they work great in theory, they work great on paper, but what is actually going on in reality? The same thing that's always been going on, right? So there's something to bear in mind when we're discussing technocracy and socialism and capitalism, etc. It's like these are all just labels that are used. They're loaded up with emotion, and then they get people fighting and arguing and debating and just conflict on this horizontal level, when really we need conflict on the vertical level, right? The parasites at the top are the people who really should be on the receiving end of conflict, not your neighbor, your family member, your husband, your friend, your colleague, your boss, etc., right? Okay, that was a bit of a rant that came out of nowhere. Let's move on a little bit with the preamble ramble. Here is an administration chart of the North American technate. I just wanted to highlight that this kind of looks like a human nervous system. You know, you got like ribs, lungs, and then you got this continental director sitting in the very top of it. Again, it's a sort of pyramidal structure with a tiny sort of controlling force at the very top and everybody else down here underneath. So again, it's the same structure over and over again, pyramid structure, time and time again. You would think that was the only structure that is possible, wouldn't you? Or that would be certainly the impression that you're left with. Like, this is the only way we can do it. The only way we can do it is to have one guy at the very top and a small group of very powerful, wealthy people below him, and then everyone else fighting with each other in competition, trying to get one over on each other and screw each other over, with trying to get their hands on some of the morsels that are left, right? We can do better than that. That's my message. Right. So I'm going to link this as well. This is a scan of The Technocrat, which is a September 1937 issue. It's pretty interesting stuff. September 1937. This is volume 3 of The Technocrat magazine. You got some good topics here. You've got technology. This bit I quite like. You've got non-technocrats quoted and exposed. So this is where they're kind of doing a sort of battleground of ideas. They're taking people who were criticizing them and rebutting their ideas with their arguments and their evidence. And I thought it was a good section to include. It's only about 10 pages, or 12 pages, as you can see here. Bit of an explanation of what is technocracy. So this stuff is relatively easy to get hold of, you know. And then let's see, where is non-technocrats quoted? Yeah, this is pretty good. I like that. And then there's also a bit down here about they do film reviews. And talking about how the price system is represented in media, which is kind of interesting that they would be focusing on media and film and movies to show you how the ideas that they are trying to get rid of are being communicated and downloaded into you by way of Hollywood. So I thought that was quite a little curiosity as well. And at the very end here, we got Howard Scott's Continental Tour. This dude, he was putting in a shift. Check this out, right? On August, he's got 22nd, 24th, 26th, 29th, 30th, speaking in a different place every day. September, basically every day in September, he's somewhere new. All right, he's touring. This dude is on tour, like from August all the way up to the end of mid-November, mid-December even. He was out there talking, doing the rounds, right? I mean, this is just says a lot about the man. That he was trying to change hearts and minds. He really believed in what he was doing, and he was putting in the legwork to build up the awareness, to get his message out there. But you know, what was his message? Well, we don't know because there's no recording of his speech. Anyway, let's go back to Joshua N. Halderman. So as you remember on this Technocracy Incorporated page we just looked at, there was this story here about a bunch of people who were arrested because they were members of an illegal organization. And one of them turned out to be Elon Musk's grandfather. And it's this man, Joshua Norman Halderman, who we're going to look at now. And this guy sounds like a really interesting dude. I got to be honest. So he was an American-born, Canadian, South African chiropractor, aviator, and politician. He became involved in Canadian politics, backing the technocracy movement before moving to South Africa in 1950. Over the course of decades, he repeatedly expressed racist, anti-Semitic, and anti-democratic views. In South Africa, he was a supporter of apartheid and promoted, and if that wasn't enough, promoted a number of conspiracy theories. So that list right there is like, okay, I want to hear what this guy said. Not that I think racism or anti-Semitism or any of that stuff is good, but I at least want to hear Elon Musk's grandfather's views from him, right? Not from whoever wrote this Wikipedia article, because we all know the kind of stuff that gets slapped with these sorts of labels these days can be like a far cry from what you might imagine. But the point is, he gets slapped with a label, and then you start thinking, oh, that guy is a terrible guy, and then you never look into what he actually said. That's the point of throwing around these labels, especially that one. No, especially that one. But definitely this one, the conspiracy theories one. Anyway, he died in a plane crash in 1974, which is, very sad. Rest in peace. He's got an early life education. It's kind of not that exciting. But his early career, he was a chiropractor, and then he turned his hand to farming. But he lost the farm during the Great Depression. So remember how the technocracy movement seems to have come out of the Great Depression, which obviously was such a harrowing, horrific time and led to such hardship that people wanted to know, why has this happened? Why has this been allowed to happen? There's supposed to be a government and people in charge who's supposed to take care of this stuff. Now here we are in the Great Depression. We're dying. We're struggling to eat. We can't feed ourselves. Everybody's poor. Life's really a whole bunch of shit. How did this happen? There's nothing like that kind of crisis to galvanize people into asking questions and wanting to understand and talking about it. They wouldn't have been hypnotized by their fondle slabs. They didn't have them. They wouldn't have had anything to take their mind off this abject poverty that they were being forced to live through. Okay, so that you got to bear that in mind when you think about this very early idea of that got technocracy started as a concept. So he lost his farm in the Great Depression, and then he became politically active in Canada. So from 1936 to 41, he was involved in Howard Scott's Technocracy Incorporated, which led to his arrest under the Wartime Defence of Canada regulations in 1940 by the Royal Mounted Police on charge of membership of an illegal organization. Technocracy Incorporated had been banned in Canada following the start of World War II, since the organization was deemed subversive to the war effort. Well, yeah, if you are saying, no, let's not sacrifice all our best and brightest and youngest, let's not put young human beings into the meat grinder, oh, you're a subversive. You are subverting the war effort, and now it is illegal. Your group is illegal. Just madness, isn't it? But back to Halderman. In 1941, he resigned from that group and for 2 years attempted to form his own political party. He published a newsletter called Total War and Defense. He was an avowed anti-communist, which is, that's always good in my book. Halderman objected to Technocracy Incorporated's declaration of support for the Soviet Union following the German invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941. So, 1941, if you remember, this is after the change, whatever that change was, where the about face happened. Technocracy was movement. The Technocracy Incorporated was against the war, and then now, yay, maximize the conscription. Sounds great. That transformation made Halderman reject the group and start criticizing them, speaking out about them. So it sounds to me like he was sort of loyal to the original ideas, like Howard Scott's like very original early version of what technocracy was and what it was all about. That's kind of the way I'm reading it. Halderman's son-in-law, Errol Musk, claimed in 2024, so what was that, last year, that Halderman sympathized with Nazi Germany during World War II. How dare you? I'm going to go Greta on your ass for how dare you sympathize with a country that was engaged in a war, having its young men murdered brutally because that's what happens on both sides of the war, any war. The young people go and get murdered brutally. And how dare you have sympathy for Nazi Germany? In 1943, Halderman joined the Social Credit Party of Canada. Right, so if you think social credit's a new thing, well, let me tell you about the Social Credit Party of Canada, which I did want to go into, but I didn't have time. I think we don't have time. We got to crack on with the book reading very soon. But something for a future preamble ramble, perhaps. Did you know that Canada had a social credit party and that they were taking members as early as 1943? How about that? And then this bit was very interesting. So he didn't do so well. He failed to get elected. And during that time, Halderman formally made statements discouraging the publicizing of the prevalent anti-Semitism in the party. I had to read that sentence a few times to kind of understand what he was saying. He discouraged the publicizing of the prevalent anti-Semitism. So he was kind of saying, it sounds to me like, hey, party, social credit party, there's anti-Semitism going on here. Be quiet about it. Don't publicize it. Because you know what happens if you publicize your anti-Semitism? You will get shut down quick, fast. However, he also gave a speech defending a decision by a party newspaper to publish the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, an anti-Semitic fabrication claiming an international Jewish conspiracy to rule the world, hang on, that's bad English, isn't it? An anti-Semitic fabrication claiming an international Jewish conspiracy to rule the world. Yes, that is bad English. Not just me going a bit funny. There's definitely one too many words in this bit here. In this speech, Halderman said that the plan as outlined in these protocols has been rapidly unfolding in the period of observation of this generation. So this is a great trick as well, right? Because this is called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, and because people say, oh, it's a lot of Jews who came up with this plan, that's what gets it shut down. But if you say, forget who wrote it, forget where it came from, look at what's written in it and compare that to what we're living through and what's happening in the present day, then you get called a conspiracy theorist and you get shut down, even though what's written in it is demonstrably occurring. And I'm not saying who's behind it, who wrote it. It probably is a forgery. It definitely isn't one group that we can put a name on, right? Whether that's a ethnic, religious, whatever label. It doesn't work that way. It's not that easy. It's not that easy to go, it's that group there, they're doing it. That's way too oversimplified for the reality of what's going on. But it doesn't change the fact that what's written in these protocols does seem, as Halderman said, to be rapidly unfolding. He would later claim apartheid South Africa was leading white Christian civilization against the international conspiracy and the hordes of colored people he claimed they controlled. So this is pretty bad stuff, really. I mean, he doesn't sound good. He doesn't reflect well on him. I still want to hear what he says from his own mouth, though. You know, these are little quotes taken out of context. I'd like to hear the full argument, even though I think it's probably an oversimplified trap that he's fallen into there. But while he moved to South Africa in 1950, and he went back to being a chiropractic practitioner. Then weeks after the Sharpeville massacre on the 21st of March 1960, Halderman self-published The International Conspiracy to Establish a World Dictatorship and the Menace to South Africa. This was a 42-page response to the massacre, the Sharpeville massacre, which I've also never heard of, and I have to read a little bit more about that. But it's occurring in the Transvaal province, which is where a lot of action took place 50 or 60 years previously. And there was a whole sort of a civil war type thing going on there in the Transvaal. I got a book here, where is it? Oh, no, hang on. It's here. And this is J.P. Fitzpatrick's book, The Transvaal from Within. This is one of the oldest books I have, actually. And this is a first-hand account of a guy who was there. Let's see, when was this written? Is there a year? Yeah, 1900. There you are. I'll show you that. 1900. The Transvaal from Within, a private record of public affairs by J.P. Fitzpatrick. So this book is referenced in, I think it's in Hidden History. I think it's in Lord Milner's Second War, all about the British involvement in this area and what they were getting up to. It's all shady stuff. But another massacre, and Halderman writes this 42-page pamphlet, I suppose. It's not really a book. Then the United Nations passes Resolution 134, the body's first official condemnation of apartheid. And then he goes on and self-publishes another book alleging more international conspiracies. And this one's called The International Conspiracy in Health. And he's targeting fluoridation, injections, and health insurance. That one I definitely would like to read. I wonder if there's a link to it. Nope, that's just an article about how terrible this man was. And that's another article about how terrible this man was from the New Yorker. It'd be good to have the text of that, see if he had any evidence or if he was just being a mean bastard, right? Bit of info about his personal life and death. He married Eve Peters in 1934. Then he ended up remarrying in 1942. And he had a daughter called May. And May became the mother of Elon Musk. And it's funny, isn't it, like how these things go. Haldeman's technocratic ideas have, allegedly, influenced Elon Musk's views. To facilitate travel between his home and practice in Regina and his various other commitments, including the ICA in Davenport, Iowa, Halderman took flying lessons, and he was doing lots of flying with his wife, his second wife, and they wrote a book called The Flying Haldermans, Pity the Poor Private Pilots. And he was doing loads of flying. And in 1954, they flew 30,000 miles to Australia and back via Asia, which is possibly the longest journey by a private pilot in a single-engine plane. It's pretty impressive. And then he died, unfortunately, on January 13th, 1974. He and a passenger were killed when his plane's wheels caught in a power line during a practice landing in his plane. So I was thinking about how, perfect this whole backstory is, because it can be read in two ways. You could read it as the original view of technocracy was really good, and they wanted to get rid of the central banks and the fiat currency and the convoluted bureaucracy of government, and they wanted to bring abundance through scientific method, right? And you could say that you could spin a narrative that Haldeman was loyal and to these original ideas from the very beginning, and he continued this battle against the bankers. And then now his grandson Elon Musk is continuing, and he's partnered up with Trump, and they are continuing this fight against the bankers, against the bloated bureaucratic leviathan of the state. You could spin a yarn, a narrative that says this is all carried on and is still going, right? And on the other side of it, you got the people who hate Trump and Musk and their work together, pointing at Haldeman, the same guy, and saying, well, he's racist and he's anti-Semitic and he supports apartheid and he's a terrible person. Therefore, Musk is probably the same because it's his grandfather, and therefore Trump and Musk are evil incarnate. You see how genius it is? Layered into this whole thing that I've just been through are one narrative for the red team and one narrative for the blue team. And it's the same information, right? You can just emphasize and parse it slightly differently, and you can have one narrative that leads to all this support for Trump and DOGE and Musk, and the other side saying, no, they're super evil, they're going to bring about the end of everything, and we're going to lose our legacy institutions, and they're going to blah, blah, blah. Very just amazing. Just reality is so amazing. It's so wonderful. It's so much more interesting than TV. That I think, I don't know, I don't even understand why people watch TV. I really don't. I've pretty much completely given up on watching TV at this point. And I would encourage you to do the same if you're still watching it. So let's get on with it. I found a copy of Haldeman's little book here called The International Conspiracy to Establish a World Dictatorship and the Menace to South Africa. I found one copy for sale. It's 15,000 R, whatever that currency means, which I had a search engine translate, is about £600. and it's in South Africa somewhere, I think. I don't know. I've never seen this website before. I was like, oh, I want to buy this. I don't have £600, but there's like a get it now, pay later thing under here. Woohoo! So, but I went back to the website and it said 0 available, out of stock. When I looked at it first and I linked it, I first bookmarked it for this preamble ramble. There was one available. Now it's gone, which is a shame. But here's the front cover. Here's the picture of it. The International Conspiracy to Establish a World Dictatorship at the Menace to South Africa, 1960, by Dr. J.N. Halderman. 5 shillings, bargain. It's got some spillages on there though. It looks like grease from the, like he's dropped his chips on it or something, and all the grease is rubbed off. But don't eat your fish and chips near your valuable conspiracy literature, people. All right. And here's the contents page. Let's have a look at this. We're lucky to even have a picture of this contents page, aren't we? Right. Page 1. What is this international conspiracy? 2. International finance is behind the international conspiracy. 3. Assassinations, the Anglo-Boer War. So that is Milner's first war, right? So in the book, Lord Milner's second war, the war being referred to in the title is World War II, and Lord Milner's role in making it happen through diplomatic means, through lies, through manipulations, through machinations, etc. But the first one was the Anglo-Boer War. 4. Cecil Rhodes. How about that? Cecil Rhodes. The subversive activities of foreign banks. 5. The international financiers. 6. The communist rise to power in Russia. 7. Sir Ernest Cassel. And then we go on. He talks about the First World War, the consolidation of financial control, the crash of 1929. So as I said, he lived through the Great Depression. He lost everything. He lost his farm. He probably would have, if he hadn't lost that farm, probably would have just been a farmer and just lived on out the rest of his days. But, he lost it all. So he wanted to get to the bottom of it. What happens when you want to get to the bottom of something? You follow the money. What happens when you follow the money? You end up learning about Cecil Rhodes, the international financiers, the people who own those banks and set them up, and what the kind of words they use to describe themselves. But then it goes on, right? So you got the Federation of Rhodesia. You got brainwashing and communist objectives. You got a bit of hopeful messaging here. He says, do not be discouraged. Something about the League of Nations. Something about the Institute of International Affairs. Whoa. Man, I would really like to read this thing, Prof. Arnold Toynbee, right? So he's the establishment's authorized historian who rewrites the history so that it looks a certain way by, write it by the victors. You got Harold Lasky and the World Council of Churches. The Power of Gold, Mental Health, Government and Private Monopolies. The Program for World Government. So remember, he's writing this back in the 60s. Central banks, Bretton Woods, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. National debts are fictitious, money out of nothing. The debt creating system, making money, international finance guards its interests. The next attempt to break South Africa. So that all sounds to me like, what's that word? Oh yeah, history. Sounds like he's written a history book here. So I would love to get my hands on a copy of that and read it sometime. You never know, right? We can keep hoping. So that pretty much brings us to the end of the preamble ramble. I got something I'll link here. This is just a report about this transformation of the money system, right? Because it sounds like early technocracy advocates had their sights set on getting rid of the fiat money printing system. They wanted to use this like energy-based mode of exchange. That's a whole paper on that from Ernst Berndt. Hell of a name. Ernst R. Berndt from September 1982. And as I mentioned before, William E. Aiken has a book called Technocracy and the American Dream, the Technocrat Movement, 1900 to 1941. You might want to buy that, right? If you are interested in learning a little bit more, you might look that up and see if you can grab a copy. And then, oh my God, yes, the cheapest copy available is £1,890. The most expensive copy available is £2,544. That is insane. Apparently, his book's only 240 pages long as well. It's not even like a big tome like Tragedy and Hope. It's less than 300 pages. But boom, if that is not a price designed to discourage you from looking into the contents of the book, then I don't know what is. But luckily, there are websites out there where you can download a copy and get an electronic copy, and it's better than nothing. 1977 book. Here it is. Like you can just literally click that button there, and it will download and give you a copy. So you can still read it, even if you don't have £1,300 to throw at a short 200-page book. And just to show you how literature on this particular topic is crazily priced, here's a copy of the Technocrats magazine, Explaining Technocracy, A Revolution Without Bloodshed, final issue 1933, and this is £1,500 as well. But it does have a pretty awesome cover, which is there's the Technocrat with his just stomping, like advancing on the Capitol building here, people just fleeing out of the way, and he is just going to smash the politicians to bits. It's a great magazine cover, isn't it? And the subtitle is 30 million out of work in 1933, or $20,000 a year income for every family, which... So it's a hell of a promise, this idea of abundance that they were trying to pitch to people. Just amazing aspect of history. And after doing this preamble ramble, I'm extremely excited about reading Patrick Wood's work on the topic, because I've heard many interviews with him, but I haven't actually read his books, and I shouldn't be admitting that, should I? I know, shame on me. Slap on the wrist. So that is the end of the preamble ramble. Longest one yet. Thank you for hanging in there. Quick announcement that I did carry out a survey on the Hayes Reviews Telegram chat, and people have voted for Between Two Ages by Z. Bignu Brzezinski. That's going to be the next book we read on the channel after we are done with Vernon Coleman's Endgame. So that was an overwhelming majority, but this is how democracy works. So all of you who voted for Julian Huxley and Renee Wormser, tough shit. Sorry, we don't care about your opinion, because this is a democracy, and that just means mob rule, and the mob has voted for Zbigniew Brzezinski. But I'm just kidding. I'm being silly, because I will get around to reading these two books for sure at some point, because I want to read them. But that's just to let you know that that's what's coming up next on the channel once we are done with this one. All right, fantastic. How's it going, everybody? Thank you for hanging in on that massive preamble ramble. I hope it was useful. I hope I connected some dots. And most importantly, I hope I ignited your curiosity, got you wanting to learn more, and gave you some threads that you can start pulling on to increase your understanding, your awareness, and update your map of reality so that it is more accurate. And you can help other people do the same now. So, allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews if you want to get involved, send me some money, share my videos, follow my channels, etc., etc., etc. You know all this stuff by now, don't you? And that is the end of tonight's preamble. Whew, that was a big one. So I appreciate all your time and attention, and we're going to get into the book right away. So a quick shout out. We got ESB over on Odyssey. We got The Outsiders Outlier still hanging in there. Anna M, Ashley Styles. We got Frank Lennon, Tammy, Elizabeth Kendall, David Lees. I hope you're all doing well. Thank you all for joining me tonight on the broadcast. It is wonderful to have you here. And now is the time of the show where I set up my book cam, because it's if I leave it set up, it's kind of just hovering in the frame all the way through, and it can be a bit distracting. It doesn't look that good, and people like things to look good, otherwise they don't take you seriously. It's like, what, you don't look good? How dare you make a video and come on the internet and not be polished and practiced and pristine in your presentation. And that was a lot of alliteration. I hope you enjoyed that. That's what you get for being an English teacher, studying English literature at university. You get to string together lots of words that start with the same letter effortlessly. Totally worth the debt and the many hours of study and stress and strife that went into obtaining that particular qualification. I highly recommend it. Right, I'm going to have a sip, and then we're going to commence with tonight's reading. Please like, comment, share, subscribe. If you haven't already, tell your friends. that the world is being taken over by maniacs, and the best place to learn about it is Hayes Reviews. I want to make this a resource that is accessible, that is upbeat, that is accurate, that is useful and entertaining. So hopefully you appreciate my efforts, and the least you could do is give us a thumbs up and a like and a share and a subscribe and a comment. Go on. It's easy. Okay, so something I got to mention about this book that is very interesting, that I really like, that is unique, and I don't have other books in my collection that are like this, is that it's an alphabetical sort of explanation of the topic. So the book's laid out. One, it doesn't have any page numbers, which is nuts. It's the only book I think in my collection that doesn't have page numbers, and two, instead of page numbers, what you have is just a load of alphabetical entries, which with explanations. So it's kind of like a reference book in a way. You can look at the term and find out Vernon Coleman's explanation of that particular thing, which is a fantastic idea and is an amazing resource, but without an index or a contents page or any page numbers, it makes looking things up really tricky. So it's actually a lot of fun because you don't know what you're going to find, and I don't know what's coming up. So today we're going to crack on with part 2, and we're going to be going through the A section and the B section, I think, before the end of the show. That's the plan. Let's get on with it. Part 2, what the world will look like. Important note, a reminder. As you read on, please remember, I wrote this book with one hand tied behind my back. Well, not literally, you understand, but figuratively. In order to publish this book, I had to remove all references to the name of the problem which triggered the house arrests, and so you will not find therein any reference to a word describing a disease which begins with the third letter of the alphabet, nor will you find any reference to a disease the name of which ends with a number which is slightly greater than 18 and slightly smaller than 20. In addition, in view of proposed new legislation which will make it illegal for anyone, including doctors, to share facts and opinions about a specific medical procedure, I had to avoid using a word beginning with V and use the word inoculation instead. I have also had to avoid using words which describe bits of material placed over the mouth and nose, and I am not allowed to mention an organization which has a name which could be mistaken for a rock band. There were several other restrictions. Readers may be puzzled by this censorship, since other authors are allowed to discuss these things in their books. The reality, however, is that I'm banned from writing about some things which are open to other authors. So, please bear with me if some material seems slightly obtuse. I sometimes think I must have wandered down the rabbit hole. The world is never going back to normal unless we take control. Those who say things will be normal in a few months or a year or two are either lying or they're ignorant. In this part of the book, I'm going to describe what we can expect in a simple alphabetical analysis of our future. And remember, this was written in 1921. So, in the first year of lockdowns. So the first entry is Adenauer Conrad. It's a quote. The good Lord set definite limits on man's wisdom, but set no limits on his stupidity. That's just not fair. One of the things I really enjoy about reading this book is the humor, the wit, the dry sarcasm, and the tone with which it's written is very entertaining and fun to read. So the next entry is affirmative action. Affirmative action is most accurately described as politically acceptable racism. So affirmative action is giving more advantages and more opportunities and more resources to people based on skin color, based on whether they are part of the majority or the minority. That's affirmative action. So yeah, politically acceptable racism is a great way to describe it. Africa is the next one. There is a disaster in Africa which is going almost unnoticed. It is a disaster of unimaginable proportions. I forecast what would happen many months ago in one of these videos. The man-made disaster was always going to be worse than any natural disaster, worse than any tsunami, any plague, or any volcanic eruption. Expert mathematical modelers advised the United Nations, and as a result of their advice, the official forecast from the UN was that there would be up to 1.2 billion cases and 3.3 million deaths from a new virus. African countries told everyone to stay indoors and did all the things they were told to do. Inevitably, things went terribly wrong. Cases of malaria and tuberculosis went undiagnosed and untreated, and both are now spreading and killing millions. Maternal mortality is soaring, and so is infant mortality. Around 10% of Africa's population will descend into extreme poverty. The number of deaths from starvation will soar. Was that really by accident, or could it have been part of the depopulation plan? Proof that the chaos was avoidable comes from Malawi. The wise government there did not impose strict house arrest rules, even though it was predicted that without house arrest there would be 50,000 deaths. The result was that out of a population of 19 million, there were, at the time of writing, just 176 deaths. Agenda 21. Under the auspices of the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, and a bunch of unelected billionaires and officials, politicians and policymakers around the world are determined on creating a global technocracy and introducing what they call the Great Reset or the Global Reset, a crude form of social engineering designed to manipulate and own every citizen on Earth. The world we know now in 2021 is just a taste of what we can expect in the future. The aim of those following Agenda 21 is to create their own version of a utopia, a global technocracy with a guaranteed income for every citizen and a system of reward, punishment, and control modeled on China's social credit system. Global warming is the excuse. Once the global reset has been completed, citizens will be monitored. Those who behave well will be rewarded. Those who fail to comply with the orders they are given will be punished and excluded from much of society. Agenda 21 is organized, legalized corruption. The plan is to remove all signs of human dignity, with every piece of dignity disappearing too slowly for most people to notice. The people who have planned this coup rely on the mass of people being too busy, too distracted, too complacent, too lazy, and too fearful to realize what's happening. And they know that they can ensure that those who speak up can be smeared, demonized, and dismissed as right-wing conspiracy theorists. The result will be that individuals will be forced to submit to the tyranny of a technocratic state with so-called self-appointed experts managing every aspect of human life. Our behavior will be controlled in minute detail, and we will be forced to be dependent on the state. This is tyranny on a scale never known before, and the events of 2020 were planned to give governments an opportunity to force us to obey and become accustomed to a new normal in which all individuality is suppressed and the power of the state and its self-appointed functionaries is everything. The fact is that everything strange, bad, restricting, and destructive that has happened in the last 3 decades is a result of Agenda 21. All of those things which happened, but which seemed wrong, inexplicable, damaging, unnatural, and unreal, were a result of Agenda 21. Most of them occurred without even the slightest nod towards democracy, since the crucial decisions were made by individuals working for the UN, the EU, or the World Economic Forum, by huge, powerful, non-governmental organizations with staff on million-dollar salaries, by quangos, and by regional parliaments, and so on, none of whom was staffed by individuals who had been elected. Our lives have steadily deteriorated in every notable way. Healthcare, education, increased taxation, local and national, rapidly deteriorating services, reduced standards of living, and increased corruption. Campaigns demanding more rights for homosexuals and transgender individuals have created conflict, broken up the traditional family unit, done a great deal of permanent harm to religions, and will have the acceptable byproduct of helping to reduce the population. Doubters and those who object can easily be demonized as homophobic or transphobic. Fear and confusion have been caused by deadly warnings and by constantly changing advice and impenetrable laws. None of this has been accidental. All trust and sense of fair play and decency have been eradicated. Ironically, it is inevitable that the destruction of fair play and trust will lead many young people to become rebellious and to stand up against authoritarianism. But that is some way ahead, and the rebellions will be quashed ruthlessly. Kindness and dignity are the main currencies of value in private life, and honesty, trust, and honor are the only currencies of value in public life. Tragically, these qualities have for years been steadily devalued, and in the last few months they have been shot, knifed, stamped on, kicked, spat on, shredded, and attacked with brutal disregard for sense or sensibility. There is no grace, no serenity, and no soul among our new leaders who have, without ever being elected to anything, clawed their way through life and with their progress based on deceits built on avarice and jealousy. As a result, millions now consider themselves to be refugees in their own countries. Tony Blair, who is, in my view, quite possibly the most evil man in modern history, Gordon Brown and Boris Johnson are reported to have called for the creation of a global bureaucracy with more power than the World Health Organization, all part of the end of sovereignty and nation states. What happened in 2020 was merely the culmination of years of common purpose, quangos, civil servants, corporate insensitivity, and local planning. Nothing happened by accident. Much of the rest of this book simply explains the full consequences of these plans, what the new normal will look like unless we call a halt to it, and how the United Nations plan will affect every aspect of our lives. Okay. Next section is AIDS. Great topic. Quite a big section here. We'll see what he has to say. I shared a book about this on part 1 of this stream, which is very much worth making a note of and grabbing a hard copy if you can. It's by Peter Duisberg. It's called Inventing the AIDS Virus. So this section, next section on AIDS. Looking back, I can see when I became a target and when commissions and media invitations suddenly dried up. In 1988, I wrote a book called The Health Scandal for a London publisher called Sidgwick and Jackson. They were incredibly excited about it. There was much talk of heavy promotion. At a special reception, the chairman of the company, Lord Rees-Mogg, told me how excited he was by the book. And I'm wondering if that is the same Lord Rees-Mogg who wrote a book that I have around here somewhere called The Sovereign Individual. The book's called The Sovereign Individual by Lord Rees-Mogg. I wonder if it's the same guy. I think it is. But continuing. The book contained a small section questioning the government's line on AIDS. I produced evidence proving that the disease was not, as we have been told, going to affect every family in Britain by the year 2000, and suddenly, without explanation, the health scandal was abandoned. The planned publicity and advertising disappeared, and Sidgwick and Jackson refused to sell the paperback rights. The book had become too hot to handle. It seemed to me clear that my questioning of the AIDS myth was clearly embarrassing to the company. I had previously written much along the same lines for the national newspaper to which I was contributing a weekly column. When my agent asked what had happened about arranging a paperback edition of the book, she was told that we could have the rights back since the company didn't want to offer the book. Within less than a week, we'd sold the book to a paperback house, and since Sidgwick and Jackson didn't want anything further to do with the book, I kept the entire paperback payment. Neither my agent nor I had ever come across anything like it. Publishers don't usually turn up their noses at a chance to collect thousands of pounds in rights money. I had exposed the AIDS fear as a lie. I produced figures which blew away the claim that we would all be affected by it, and suddenly, virtually overnight, I became a non-person. Regular appearances on television programs were cancelled. Invitations to appear on BBC television and radio programs ceased. I still wrote contracted newspaper columns, but I had clearly been marked as dangerous. My books were only rarely reviewed in the UK. Requests to make keynote speeches stopped suddenly. As far as the establishment was concerned, I had become a nuisance and clearly had to be silenced. After I exposed the way the AIDS crisis had been exaggerated, I found that publishers around the world suddenly let my books go out of print or remaindered them and refused to consider new titles. My German publishers had been selling fairly large amounts of my books. For example, one year I received a royalty check of around £30,000 for sales of How to Stop Your Doctor Killing You and Body Power. But the books then disappeared, and the following year I received nothing in royalties. The publishers did not respond when I asked what had happened or when I sent them other titles, and I was banned in China where my books had been bestsellers. After I wrote a column on a forbidden topic for a leading Chinese newspaper, much the same sort of thing happened around the world. Only now does it seem obvious that the AIDS virus was being promoted as the plague that would prepare us for Agenda 21. They massively increased the global mortality figures by, for example, including just about everyone who died of tuberculosis, among other common disorders. I am not alone in thinking that AIDS was a rehearsal. That's a hell of a word to use, but a good one to remember. I received a note from a reader who said, I worked in several genitourinary medicine clinics between 1989 and 92, and then again between 1997 and 2002. One of my duties in the latter post was reporting the monthly numbers to CDC Colindale. The government used to manipulate those figures. The BBC and other mainstream media were happy to unquestionably report them. There have, of course, been a number of other attempts to find a scary story with which to terrify the world. Avian flu and swine flu, to name but two. And what did these threats have in common? They were all subject to dramatically exaggerated forecasts from Professor Neil Ferguson at Imperial College London, the one with links to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and a man who seems to me to be so incompetent that if he designed a cup, he'd put the handle on the inside. Yeah, that's a great name to be aware of, and be careful of the spelling, because there's Neil Ferguson at Imperial College London, and there's also Neil Ferguson, that's Niall, who is a mainstream biographer of families such as the Rothschilds, and I've got a book of his on Kissinger. I mean, not that I want to spoil your day by showing you a picture of Kissinger. But that's Neil Ferguson, the mainstream authorized historian. He's done the two paperback books on the Rothschild. And he's doing this whole series on Kissinger now. But worth knowing that he is a liar. And he was also responsible for the deaths of massive amounts of cows during the sort of mad cow disease scare as well. So I'm just going to have a sip quickly. All right. Next section is alcoholism. The incidence of alcoholism has been rising fast since April 2020, shutting pubs and restaurants, but continuing to allow supermarkets to sell cheap booze has meant that increasing numbers of people are drinking heavily at home. The number of alcoholics or nearly alcoholics in the UK had within months doubled from around 4 million to over 8 million. The number of deaths from alcoholism has soared. It is no accident that the closure of pubs has also led to the closure of a number of small brewers, leaving the market open for large international companies. I suspect that the next move will be to restrict the sale of alcohol in supermarkets or to increase the tax on alcohol, ostensibly because of the increase in alcoholism caused by the closure of pubs. This will cause more pain and distress. The real reason will, of course, be to reduce alcohol sales. This will be done to reduce the damage done to society by alcohol consumption and also help lead us to the world's religion of Chrislam. It is interesting to note that wildfires have become an existential threat to the entire American wine industry. There have been 7 big fires affecting the wine industry between 2015 and 2020. The fires have destroyed vines and damaged every aspect of the wine industry. It is difficult not to conclude that this is deliberate. As an associated aside, it's worth noting that during the same period, the amount of tobacco being smoked has also risen, while gambling is much more of a problem than it was before the events of 2020. Naturally, as always, everything that is happening is part of a plan. Nothing that happens today happens by accident. Everything is a consequence of deliberate action. And ain't that the truth? It's interesting to read, actually, the predictions, the forecasting of what's going to happen next and what's coming, given that we've had 4 years since the writing of the book to compare with what he says is going to happen. It makes reading this very good experience. Okay. Next section is alienation. It isn't difficult to see why some are calling this the age of alienation. Those of us who attempt to share the truth are lied about, demonized, harassed, and often arrested. The very idea that anyone might offer an alternative point of view terrifies the heavy-booted brigade who have put themselves in charge. Telling the truth has always been a crime in fascist and totalitarian regimes. That's a good quote as well. You're not allowed to tell the truth unless it's our truth, or the authorized truth, or the consensus truth. And since the rules change from one area to another, we never quite know what punishments to expect. In one part of America, you can be sent to prison for a year if you fail to cover your mouth and nose. In another part of America, you have to pay a $2,000 fine, but there's no prison sentence. In Texas, some people have been told that they should wear face coverings in their own homes. In one shop, a guard pulled a gun on a man who was not wearing a face covering. In California, people have been telephoning the police if they've heard a neighbor coughing or sneezing. The snitches and sneaks eager to please the system are part of the mass surveillance system. Yeah. This see it, say it, sort it type thing is conditioning everybody to be like this, right? Don't sort anything out. Don't challenge anything yourself. Always defer to the people in charge. Always defer to the people with the uniforms, right? It's a constant effort to program you to give your authority away to somebody else. Next section is alternative energy. Huge amounts of fossil fuel are being used to build solar farms, wind farms, electric car batteries, and a variety of other forms of renewable energy, some of which, such as barrages and tidal wave energy recovery, have never been proven to work. There's little doubt that many of these new forms of energy are of negative value. Building and running a wind farm, for example, requires more energy than the wind farm will produce, and some are absurd. Solar is useless when the sun isn't out, which in Northern Europe, for example, is most of the time. And wind power is useless when there isn't any wind, which is surprisingly often. Biofuels are promoted as a clean way to keep engines running, but it has been recognized for years that turning corn and other crops into biofuel merely increases the number of people starving to death. Biomass is quite possibly the most hypocritical invention of all time. Global warming extremists want to stop funding so that oil companies will not find more oil. They want us to stop using oil. However, the International Energy Agency has stated that by the year 2040, our planet will still obtain only around 5% of its energy needs from renewable sources, including burning trees for biomass. Without fossil fuels, billions will die of starvation and the cold. We need to take a hard scientific look at the various alternative sources of energy which are recommended as alternatives to the fossil fuels. First, there is wind. It is a clean, long-established and renewable technology, and the energy it produces doesn't require sending men underground to do dangerous jobs in difficult circumstances. There is no pollution unless you count the alarmingly annoying noise pollution made by windmills and the destruction of wildlife caused by the turning blades. The energy produced by wind is relatively cheap and competitive with other sources of energy. Unfortunately, you do need rather a lot of windmills to provide even a relatively small amount of electricity. In his book, The Coming Economic Collapse, Stephen Lieb reports that in order to replace 10% of America's coal consumption at the time around 5% of America's electricity supply with wind, would require between 36,000 and 40,000 windmills. To meet all America's electricity needs would require 20 times that number and take a decade to construct. Inevitably, there are snags with obtaining energy from wind. First, we would need vast numbers of windmills. There is no sign of anyone wanting to build them in sufficient quantities. Second, building windmills uses up large amounts of fossil fuel. And yet the Greens who want the windmills don't want oil companies to continue looking for oil. Will the world's motorists, airline travelers, and military agree to vast quantities of the planet's remaining oil being used to make windmills? Somehow, I doubt it. Third, to build enough wind turbines to fill our fuel needs would cost billions. One estimate suggests that building enough windmills in America would cost £2,500 per man, woman, and child in America. Will citizens be prepared to spend £2,500 each today to provide themselves with fuel tomorrow? And will they put up with the environmental cost? Who will want the windmills in their backyard? Fourth, most countries are not windy enough for windmills to work effectively. For example, even the UK is not as windy as some people think, and the idea that wind turbines could generate even a fifth of the UK's energy needs by 2020 is nonsense. There are, quite simply, too many calm days when the windmills would stand idle. When the wind doesn't blow, you don't get any electricity. Indeed, electricity has to be used from other sources to keep the windmills moving and to stop them seizing up. The problems with wind reliability are vast. Germany has a lot of wind farms, but these can only produce a sixth of their potential capacity. There is no way to store wind-generated electricity when the wind blows very hard, and there is no way that any developed country could obtain its power from wind farms unless the demand for power was dramatically reduced. And I think he might have just uncovered the real motive about how this is going to be achieved. Fifth, wind turbines affect the environment too. They don't just look horrid and make an awful noise. Try building one near to a country cottage owned by a politician to find out how unpopular wind farms really are. If you erect enough windmills to produce useful amounts of energy, they will change the climate and change the surface drag of the earth. It is clear that even politicians don't have much faith in wind energy. In some parts of Europe, homeowners who spend money on eco-friendly wind turbines or indeed on solar panels or other energy-saving measures are forced to pay higher taxes. Ironically, the most practical use of wind and windmills may be to grind corn in small communities. Solar power. All right, that's the end of wind power. Solar power has been around a long time. The ancient Chinese are believed to have used glass and mirrors to harness the sun's rays and make fire. Solar energy sounds wonderful. It's clean and quiet, and sunshine is abundant in some parts of the world. But solar cells aren't very efficient, converting only about a tenth of the light they receive into electricity, and they are expensive. Solar power is at best a niche energy source. It cannot be used to provide chemicals for farmers, and it cannot easily be used to power the world's fleet of cars, lorries, and airplanes. What else is there? Well, there's biofuels, of course. And biofuels, remember, are the fuel of choice for global warming cultists. However, it's worth pointing out that the stuff known as biofuel, crops such as corn, is known to much of the world as food. By encouraging the use of biofuels, the global warming enthusiasts are condemning much of the world to death by starvation. And there is always biomass, said to be the biggest source of renewable energy. Biomass is the green word for wood, and we have to remember that although wind farms and solar panels get a great deal of publicity, they produce a marginal amount of electricity. The greater part of the energy which is said to come from renewables comes from burning wood pellets, biomass, and in the UK, most of the biomass is imported from America. So the trees which the planet needs are chopped up, and shipped to the UK in big ships driven by diesel. And once the trees get to the UK, they are renamed biomass and burned to produce clean electricity. Curiously, a politician named Chris Huhne, who was arrested, convicted and jailed for perverting the course of justice, and who was the Liberal Democrats' environmental spokesman and an energy and global warming consultant, was, soon after his sentence, appointed European manager of a biomass firm which makes wood chip pellets in the US and which sells them around the world as green energy. While he was Energy and Global Warming Secretary, Huhne championed the use of green subsidies for wood pellets, and subsequently several £100 million of British taxpayers' money was being spent on buying the pellets. It's been estimated that cutting the trees, turning them into pellets, bringing them across the Atlantic, and burning them does more damage than burning coal and costs a good deal more. It is, of course, perfectly possible to obtain electricity from moving water. Mill owners have been using rivers to power their water mills for centuries. Today, almost 10% of American electricity is obtained through hydroelectric projects. And rivers and reservoirs aren't the only source of water power. The sea is another relatively untapped source, and some people claim that we can harness wave power. The first problem is that waves vary constantly. Sometimes they're high. Sometimes they're almost invisible. The result is that the electricity obtained from the sea tends to be intermittent. And you can't run cars or jets on wave power, nor can you make fertilizer from the sea. The second problem is that the energy required to obtain energy from the sea is enormous. Building and maintaining the infrastructure would require a tremendous amount of oil, so obtaining electricity from wave power is pretty much out. Hydrogen is a favorite among those who claim we will be able to replace oil with something else, and superficially it looks good. Hydrogen fuel cells provide a renewable, clean energy source. They combine hydrogen and oxygen chemically to produce electricity, water, and heat. But the main problem is that there isn't enough hydrogen to go around. In addition, hydrogen is neither cheap nor environmentally friendly, and hydrogen fuel isn't terribly efficient, for although it's true that the byproduct of using hydrogen as a source of energy is clean water, so the process is environmentally friendly, the other big problem is that collecting the hydrogen requires vast amounts of oil, natural gas, or coal. There are no wonderful underground reservoirs of hydrogen waiting to be exploited. Hydrogen has to be manufactured from hydrocarbon sources such as coal or natural gas, or extracted from water. So we're back where we started, needing a fossil fuel supply. It is possible to generate small amounts of hydrogen using electricity generated by windmills, and hydrogen fuel cells can be used to power cars, so it might be possible to provide fuel for a few cars in this way. We would, however, need to build an entirely new infrastructure to support and fuel those hydrogen-powered cars. It isn't really much of an answer to any problem. Finally, the big, insurmountable problem is that producing hydrogen always uses more energy than is obtained. Hydrogen, like windmills and biofuels, is a negative source of energy, and it just doesn't make sense to turn oil or anything else into hydrogen. So there we are. We give thanks for the oil, the gas, and the uranium which God supplied us with, and we carry on using them, or, well, there isn't really an or. And that's your section on alternative energy. There could be some massive breakthrough, some amazing thing that we haven't thought of, some invention that comes along that gives us all free energy. Seems unlikely, though. And if there was, I think it would probably get memory hold. So the next section is animals. As you might know if you watched part one in this series, Vernon Coleman is a sort of not an animal rights activist, but he speaks out passionately against experimentation on animals and vivisection as a practice. I think he's a vegan too, so be interesting to read his view on animals. There is no place for animals, either farm animals or pets, in the global reset. Animals are considered to be a threat and must be eradicated. The United Nations wants to keep animals away from people and to reduce the number of animals on Earth. Their policy of keeping space between animals and people is bizarrely called biodiversity. The short, medium, and long-term aim is to install people in smart cities and to feed them with laboratory-produced meat. There will be no need or place for farm animals or pets when the Great Reset has taken place. Animals, wild and domesticated, are being demonized and are now being blamed for epidemics past and present. We are warned that animals could create new plagues. In the last year or two, millions of hens, ducks, geese, pigs, cows, and even mink have been slaughtered because of alleged threats of disease. A few years ago, a team at Imperial College in London involving Neil Ferguson, yes, that's the same guy, who's a mathematician, warned that a foot and mouth problem needed to be dealt with by a massive slaughter of animals. Their modelling of foot and mouth disease led to a cull of 6 million sheep, pigs, and cattle. The cost to the UK was around £10 billion, but the Imperial's work has been described as severely flawed. Ferguson, of course, has an appalling track record. In 2002, he predicted that up to 50,000 people would die from mad cow disease. He said that could rise to 150,000 if sheep were involved. In the UK, the death total was 177. In 2005, he said that up to 200 million people could be killed, it's always a could be killed by bird flu. The total number of deaths was 282 worldwide. In 2009, he advised the government which, relying on that advice, said that swine flu would kill 65,000 people in the UK. In the end, swine flu killed 457 people in the UK. I really like that paragraph there because his model and the modelling of Imperial College was one of the main pieces of evidence which was presented to the people who decided to lock us down and threaten us and bully us and coerce us and browbeat us and intimidate us for, 3.5 years? So remembering that Neil Ferguson's information was relied upon and he had such an abysmal track record is a very important thing to burn into your memory banks. So continuing. The UN Convention on Biological Diversity has said that things have to change in order to stop an ongoing decline in nature. It is not entirely clear what is meant by this, but the UN has stated that the vast majority of outbreaks of new disease are a result of animal disease affecting people. Oh no. There is, of course, no evidence for this absurd claim. You might as well argue that the vast majority of outbreaks of new disease are a result of people watching rubbish programs on television. I find that totally believable as a premise. I think television is absolutely causing people to get sick and be unwell, not least because of the nocebo effect. You've heard of the placebo effect. Well, the nocebo effect is the same in reverse. You can make yourself sick if you believe you're getting sick. Right? So this is why they had to have the 6 o'clock news with the scary graphs and the computer-generated images of spiky beach balls floating around to scare you every night, so that you would the nocebo effect within you, the power of your mind over your own biology and physiology, would accentuate and amplify any kind of little ache, pain, dribble, snotty nose, sniffle, whatever you might have. The nocebo effect is a real thing. The placebo effect is a real thing. Every clinical trial that is carried out has to have a control group to account for the placebo effect. The nocebo effect is known, it's studied, it's understood, and it is used against you by the people who do that sort of thing, you know. But that's why I think television could absolutely be responsible for, massive amounts of increase in disease and ill health and what's it called when you hypochondriac type of people and personalities who are always having to find things that are wrong with themselves and are always getting sick. It's because they look for it, and it's part of their like identity and their personality, and they like to have something to blame, and they call it my health thing, right? It's my arthritis, or it's my bipolar disorder, or it's my asthma, etc., etc. Instead of just getting to the root of it and learning how to fix it, which can be done because the body is a self-healing organism, and we know this because if we cut our hand, the skin closes and it heals, and it bleeds and it clots, and then it regrows. We know this is true for every part of our body, except for the things that we say are mine. They're part of me, and this is what I need to be part of my identity, so I can use it as an excuse and a crutch as to why I haven't, done these other things in my life that I should be doing that I don't want to do. So, and that's not to say that people aren't genuinely sick and don't have real conditions. Of course they do. I'm just saying that there is also a culture of the hypochondriac, where people are not interested in taking responsibility for their own health outcomes. And again, it comes back to this idea of outsourcing your authority to the police, to the government, to the NHS, to the pharmacist, to the doctor, to the nurse, to the midwife. All of these people are the experts, and they know you better than you, and so therefore you should listen to them and do what they say. Right? It's the same pattern over and over and over and over and over again at every level and layer of society. Continuing, he is saying that you might argue that disease is caused by people watching rubbish on TV, or the vast majority of outbreaks of new disease are a result of the United Nations spending its money on producing pseudo-scientific reports, which are of absolutely no value. I'd say that's pretty likely. I think a lot of the disease is a result of Neil Ferguson playing with computers. A BBC program fronted by David Attenborough is reported to have claimed that modern diseases such as swine flu, SARS, and Ebola were caused by our having more contact with animals. In my view, there is as much evidence for this as there is that these diseases were caused by our watching stupid programs on the BBC. So good. It's all just part of Agenda 21. Brilliant. All right, arts. This is the last entry in the A section. As 2020 progressed, so various aspects of the arts began to demand government financial support. By the end of the year, a wide variety of the arts had become subsidized and government controlled. They had in practice been nationalized, effectively owned and controlled by state bureaucrats. And magazines, like newspapers, were also being controlled by governments through the medium of advertising, bought by the government and paid for by unwitting and largely unwilling taxpayers. And now we're into the B section. So we're starting off with bacterial pneumonia. It has been shown that many of those who appear to die of viral infections, such as flu and the one ending in a number that I can't mention, actually die of bacterial pneumonia, which could be treated with antibiotics. The evidence proving this was published in 2008, and one of the co-authors of the paper involved was Dr. Fauci, who in 2020 became one of the American president's chief advisors. Dr. Fauci as well, before his, he was, I think, pardoned by, Biden. I'm going to write that here, pardoned by Biden. And he was also the highest paid, I don't want to say public servant, because they're obviously not servants, are they? We're the servants. We're the cattle down here being harvested and farmed for our taxes. But you know what I'm getting at. I'm pretty sure he was the highest paid public servant in the American government. You can fact check me on that, though. I'm not 100% if I'm right about that. But he certainly was making a mint, that's for sure. And then he was pardoned by Biden. Before, it was one of the last things Biden did before going out to get some ice cream. This evidence means, but it's interesting that Fauci was part of this paper published in 2008, which said that actually it's not flu that's killing people, it's bacterial pneumonia. This evidence means that the doctors who refused to treat elderly residents in care homes should be charged with murder rather than manslaughter. They should have known that by withholding simple antibiotics, they were deliberately sentencing those people to death. Right. I mean, it's heavy stuff. The next B is bankruptcy. The Great Reset, as advertised by King, formerly known as Prince Charles, doesn't include any provision for private property unless you're already a billionaire or a member of the British royal family. If you don't believe me, check out the Agenda 21 promotional guff as published by the United Nations and take a look at Pope Francis's words on private property. So I hear you asking, how are the Sturmbannführers and Obsturmbannführers planning to take away our private property? Silly question, I'm afraid, because they've already started their 5-point plan to bankrupt us all. The only people able to own private property will be the billionaires and the royals. You didn't think they'd give up their wealth, did you? They don't want us to own anything. And this reminds me actually of David Webb's book, The Great Taking, which I'll put in the margin here. The Great Taking. Worth looking up. Parallel Mike's interviewed David Webb. And you can avail yourself of that information. It's quite complex if you're not financially minded, as I am not. But the too long didn't read is that legal mechanisms have been put in place so that everything you own or think you own can be collected as collateral against secured creditors. Hopefully that sentence just made sense. That's my very inexpert attempt at summarizing it in one sentence. But the book's free. You can get the PDF. Great Taking, The Great Taking. It's David Rogers Webb. And there's plenty of information out there that you can get hold of. He's talked to a lot of people about it. It just aligns and complements what Vernon Coleman's writing about here. So, continuing. They don't want us to own anything because people who own a home or a pension or who have a few quid in the bank have an unacceptable tendency to assume that they are free citizens. The aficionados of the Great Reset want to remove every last vestige of our independence, and they'll be ruthless. First, of course, crashing the global economy has buggered up any investments you may have. And don't think you're okay if you don't have any investments, because unless you work for the state and have a state pension, your retirement fund will have been savagely damaged by the destruction of the economy. Wrecking the global economy was deliberate, not accidental. It was part of the Agenda 21 plan. Billionaires such as Gates and Musk did amazingly well during 2020. Their wealth grew massively, but I bet yours didn't. But then Bezos controls much of the internet. The Gates Foundation has shares in a variety of drug companies making specific products, and Musk has the electric car industry tied up. The rest probably just shorted the markets to get rich. Remember the Rothschilds at the end of the Battle of Waterloo? They tricked all the other traders into thinking that Napoleon had won, and then cleaned up and made a huge fortune. Second, they have reduced interest rates to a level never seen before. If you have £1 million sitting in your government savings account, the annual interest will just about buy you a tank full of petrol. And just to add to the excitement, the central banks are all talking about negative interest rates. Put a few quid into a deposit account and you'll have to pay interest to the bank. Third, the crashing economy will destroy millions of jobs. The United Nations said in 2020 that 50% of all jobs are going to disappear, and we can trust them because it's their game, their ball, and their packet of sandwiches. Those without jobs, I'm not laughing at the information, it's just the turn of phrase that he uses I think is really good. It's their game, their ball, and their packet of sandwiches. Those without jobs will have to rely on government handouts, renamed the Universal Basic Income. Fourth, if you own your own home, or think you do, or own part of it, then you're in trouble. Interest rates are going to remain the lowest in history for a while to make sure that those with savings see their savings slowly disappear. And then interest rates will go up, not a bit, but a lot. I'll explain why in a moment. And when interest rates are up to 8, 9, or 10% or even higher, imagine what mortgage payments will reach. They'll be even higher. And most people won't be able to afford to keep their homes. That will be the end of private home ownership and another step towards a successful Agenda 21. Fifth, why are interest rates going to soar? Well, because when interest rates rocket, so too will inflation. And massive inflation is the best way for governments to get rid of their massive, otherwise unpayable debts. And massive rates of inflation also destroy any savings that people have hung on to. Oh, and there is a special sixth trick up their sleeve. Taxes. Yeah, everyone loves taxes. Governments everywhere have been throwing money around with great joy. 10 billion here, 100 billion there. They'll need to replenish the coffers, pay off the debts. And so taxes are going to rise. They'll invent new taxes you've never dreamt of, and the main aim will not be to raise money, but to impoverish everyone. They don't want us to own anything. It's the plan. Check it out. I'm not making this up. And yeah, that's the infamous World Economic thing. You'll own nothing and be happy, right? You'll own nothing. And they tried to scrub that, but a lot of people downloaded it and copied it and reproduced it and sent it out. But that was from the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab's little think tank. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy. It also aligns with like the Buddhist kind of way of thinking, or like that the desire is an attachment is the source of all pain, right? Something like that. But continuing with the section, and when we're all impoverished, they will generously pay us all a universal basic income, and we will all be entirely dependent on Bill Gates, Klaus Schwab, and company for our daily bread. And so just to talk to the universal basic income for a moment, this links back to our preamble ramble tonight, which was the technocratic idea of getting rid of the fiat currency, getting rid of the money, and replacing it with some sort of energy. What do they call it? Energy certificates, didn't they? And this is what this is what all the Bitcoin and all the crypto and all that kind of stuff is preparing us for. Getting us used to this idea of not physically owning anything, but the numbers go up and the numbers go down. Like, whoa, I'm rich, no, I'm poor again. And this whole like intangible modality of money and finance, right? That all of that is just the incremental steps and stages to prep people and get people used to this energy certificates idea, which came out of the original Technocracy Incorporated movement, which we just learned about on Wikipedia. So universal basic income will not be a fiat thing. It'll be some sort of electronic, money of some sort. Okay. Sorry, I just noticed as well in the chat that people are deleting their comments, and I apologize if that's because I'm not addressing them and mentioning them. I'm just like really eager to get through the book and get this on the record, and so apologies if people are wishing that I was addressing some of the comments in the chat. I haven't been doing much of that this stream. I usually do, and so I feel bad. So please don't delete yourself because I'm not seeing it and commenting on it. All right. Okay. Continuing, we will be if we misbehave or criticize our masters, then our payment won't come through and our digital bank account will remain empty. And remember, according to the technocracy idea, you can't save it. You can only spend it in approved places. You can't give it to other people, and it will expire. So if you don't use it, you'll lose it. Continuing, if we were to lose this war, which we won't because we can't, the dissidents would all be living in mud huts and eating grass and slug pie, while the billionaires would get forever richer. The people controlling the system are not inept or incompetent. They are deceitful, devious, and far more wicked than anything most of us have ever come across. That's a really important point. One of the main ways that this whole scam is carried out is by hiding behind a fake veneer of incompetence. So you've got like Bojo with his disheveled hair, and you've got Trump, who's a bit bombastic and a bit of a comedian, and he's entertaining to listen to and talk to, and then you sit there in your armchair watching your little glowing rectangle, and you're saying, "Oh, these bunch of idiots, they're so incompetent, they're so ridiculous, they're stupid, what idiots, what morons." No, they're calculating, they are psychopathic, they are very, very manipulative. They know exactly what they're doing, but they would rather you think they were incompetent than knew the truth, which is that they are like evil psychopaths. And I just saw a comment on YouTube, Anna, saying one of your comments disappeared. I don't know why that is. It's certainly not me, and I don't have any mods with the power of deleting comments. So if that's happening, that's interference from outside, which is a bit creepy, isn't it? But thank you for letting me know about that. I'll keep an eye on things. But yes, so the people controlling the system, not inept, not incompetent. Don't believe that. Don't be lulled into a sense of, oh, they're just a bunch of idiots and they're out of touch and they're old-fashioned. They don't know what they're doing. They serve very predatory, psychopathic, knowledgeable, dedicated, persistent, ruthless people. Not lizards, not aliens, but people. So continuing. When I was a GP, I worked as a police surgeon for some years. I have met, examined, and interviewed a number of murderers. I never met any as evil as the deceitful and devious politicians, scientists, and doctors now determined to destroy everything we value for power and money. Make no mistake about it, the end of civilization is coming towards us at the speed of light. There are still people who think things will get better. They won't. Next year is going to be far, far worse than this year, and it is going to be ever harder to break the hold the evil people have on our lives. If you are awake and you care about life, your family, your friends, and your community, then you have to do everything you can to stop these people and halt the Agenda 21 plan. Yeah, I think he was actually correct in that, saying that 2022 was worse than 2021. So continuing with the B section, got some good topics coming up in the B section actually, but we might not get to the end of it tonight. There's quite a bit left, as you can see. Next topic is banned. I have banned and censored and suppressed a good deal in my life, but during the last 12 months, I think he's meant to say I have been banned and censored and suppressed, rather than I have banned. I think that might be a typo there. Hang on, I have been banned a good deal in my life, but during the last 12 months, the banning, censoring, and suppressing has gathered apace. I have lost track of the number of internet platforms which have banned me and my work. My videos and books have been deleted, although videos and books on the same subjects have been left alone. Which reminds me, Vernon Coleman has a new video out, and I've linked it below in the video description. It's the top link. It's on the onevsp.com website, or it was when I made this video and put that link in there earlier today. If it's still there now, I don't know. Should be though. I think OneVSP has the whole back catalog of Vernon's videos, so they are there and accessible. Okay, next section is bats. Most bats are among the commonest animals in the UK, but they are treated as a protective species. Why? I believe that making bats protected means that rural country, the lofts and eaves of which often provide homes for bats, are impossible to repair or restore. Oh, interesting. The presence of bats means that essential building work simply cannot be done, or the cost of working around the bats is so great as to make the repair or restoration work impractical. The bats are being used by the followers of the Agenda 21 guidelines. A number of species of animal are protected by law. In some cases, this is understandable because some animals are without doubt endangered and close to extinction. Sometimes this is a result of man's activities, and sometimes it's not. But there are some puzzles. Absurd regulations are used to protect species which are not endangered and which could often be moved somewhere else, in order to stop essential road or building works which are not considered essential for the progress of Agenda 21. There are many paradoxes sewn into the lining of Agenda 21. One of the paradoxes is, why are all our technological items built to break within a year or two? Because you could engineer things to last a very, very, very long time. They used to engineer things to last a very, very, very long time. But nowadays, it is throwaway, trashy, plastic, planned obsolescence. And that's all we have access to. And yet we're supposed to believe that these companies care about the world and sustainability and Agenda 21 and all that. And it's a total paradox. It doesn't make any sense. And it's an easy thing to point out to people when they're kind of like, we got to save the earth. Yeah, we got to save the earth. Stop having children. Stop eating steak. And don't go on holiday. And turn your lights off. And wash your yogurt cartons and all that kind of stuff. The next one is beehive mentality. The Agenda 21 is a plan to turn the world into a giant beehive in which the vast majority of us will be drones, beavering away as slaves. The queen bees, living lives of glorious luxury, will be people like Blair, Schwab, Gates, King formerly known as Prince Charles, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, and so on, plus their families. Yeah, the other thing about the beehive mentality is the symbol is used in, I've mentioned it before, but it's used, my place of work has a system where all the staff are listed with their CVs and experience, etc. It's called the Hive. And the city where I live, the symbol of the city is the bee. And it's on the buses and taxis, and people have stickers on their cars, and it's just all over the place. So they use this symbolism of the bee and the hive. They use it wisely. It's also a very important symbol in masonry as well. Like Freemasonry is the hive. You see it quite a bit. No accident. And yeah, I would think very carefully. I personally have a problem with being like told I'm a hive. You know, I'm a member of a hive. Because the hive is the hive mind, it's the Borg, it is the consensus, it is the reality that is, it's collectivism, it's the death of individualism. So it's all tied up in that one thing. But of course, tied up in that metaphor is, as he mentions here, the queen bees, that tiny minority of parasites who do nothing and live off the work. The rest of us are harvested, farmed, we're expendable, we're sent off to kill each other in wars. Meanwhile, there's this tiny minority sitting in unbelievable luxury and wealth, and it's just incomprehensible the level of power, wealth, influence that they enjoy. And they want to keep it for themselves, right? Anna makes a great point saying, ironically, the bees are dying out, through pesticides, and they're incredibly important animals, but we're not bees, right? Human beings are not bees. Even though it's human beings. Maybe there's no accident that we're actually called human beings. Right. But we are different animals. We're totally different. And I love bees, and I try and look after them and help them and give them a drink of water, and, be careful not to, if they're trapped in the house, I'll let them outside. Nothing wrong with bees, the animal. I have a problem with being likened to a bee and being told I'm part of a hive and that I'm a drone and I'm a worker and all that kind of stuff. And that is what I get through the city council. That's the imagery they decide to bombard us all with every day in this city, and it's the imagery that my corporate employer decides to bombard me with every time I log into the system there. So I think it's insulting, and I think it's disgraceful. Also, look out for the hexagon, because you see that all over the place as well. Just the 6-sided hexagon, and that actually I won't even get into the symbolism thing now. I don't do that very well. There's other channels where you can get that stuff, but yeah, beehive mentality, it's a thing. Keep an eye out for it. You'll start seeing it everywhere. The next section is benzodiazepines in drinking water. It has been suggested that tranquilizers such as benzodiazepines should be put into the drinking water to calm citizens who are upset by fears about the present and the future. It's not a new idea. The suggestion was dismissed when it was first made around half a century ago. I fear it might not be dismissed so easily today. I fear it might already be happening. They might already be doing this, either drinking water or air or food or who knows, right? Some method by which they can placate and pacify the masses by getting chemicals into them. It's a tale as old as time. Next part is Big Lebowski. It's a quote. A man is someone who is prepared to do the right thing, whatever the cost. Great quote. Love it. Or a woman. Women can also do the right thing, whatever the cost. So, but it's a quote from a film. Not Vernon Coleman's words there. All right, B. Continuing. Bikeable. Why they needed to create this word, I cannot imagine. It means a route upon which you can travel with the aid of a bicycle. In the old pre-Agenda 21 days, we used to use the words such as road and path. But the Agenda 21 fascists want to destroy everything, including our language. Yeah, that's a great point. The control of the language and the way you use it is absolutely, critically, unbelievably, overwhelmingly important. Guard your words. Put good words in, right? You will speak in the way that you hear other people speak. It's just what we do. We're human beings. Monkey see, monkey do. It's part of the reality of being human. But I was thinking about this. If you pick five, let's say, five incredibly eloquent, accomplished public speakers whose information is good and uplifting and well researched and their resources are, they give their receipts, they show you where they get their information from. If you pick five and you listen to them and put all that input in, you will eventually start speaking like them. You will your subconscious mind, the parts of your brain that produce language will attempt to use the same kinds of grammatical structures and linking of ideas and concepts that they use, the people you're listening to, I'm talking to. So if you listen to a load of morons babbling on about stupid stuff in a semi-incoherent, illiterate way, you're going to speak like that. And that's what you're going to sound like. If you listen to people who are well-spoken and articulate and can express ideas and are able to also be persuasive, not persuasive in the kind of manipulative sort of way, but persuasive in that they can marshal evidence, concepts and ideas and information and present it in a way that is believable and convincing, that they've done their research and they know what they're talking about, then you can also become someone who does that. And that's a very great thing to be able to do. So I hope that makes sense. Like, if you want to improve the way you speak in your own language, you got to find good examples of people who can already speak well and listen to them a lot. You don't have to study them, write down pen and paper and look at what they're doing, but just absorbing it, taking it in, will improve your ability to do the same thing. And so that's a kind of a key takeaway that I would like to underscore, And the people I would recommend might be, so the top, let's see, I would say you want to go for people like Mark Passio, Richard Grove, Alan Watt, cuttingthroughthematrix.com, James Corbett, maybe Jay Dyer, right? Regardless of what you think about them as people, I think they're all very accomplished public speakers. And there's many, many more out there as well. They're just the ones that I personally like a lot and have gained a lot of value from. I don't listen to most of those guys that much anymore. I listen to Corbett and Alan Watt these days. I don't listen to the others as much, but I just don't have time, right? It's not because of their content is, it's just like I'm strapped for time at the minute. But if I do find some time, those are the kind of guys I'll go and listen to. So that's a top tip for you. And don't use words like bikeable, because if you refuse to use the language that they're presenting to you, it's because that's part of the warfare. The language, the words shapes the way you think, and the way you think and feel also feeds into behavior. So you can refuse to use their language, say, I'm not using those words, or you can challenge and demand definitions. Say, I don't understand what you're saying. You need to define these words for me. Right, and bring it down to this level of defining the terms, because that's very important as well for being understood and having conversations that are not total catastrophic clusterfucks where we don't understand each other and we miss each other's points, right? So, top tip. There you are. So, Bilderbergers. Bilderberg meetings began at the Hotel de Bilderberg in Oosterbeek in the Netherlands in May 1954. They began with a conference organized by Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands. Today, Bilderberg meetings take place in many different locations. A great deal of secrecy surrounds these regular meetings, which receive substantial financial support from a number of institutions, including the American government and the CIA. The bankers all follow a simple pattern. Politicians, company directors, bankers, university professors, strategists, journalists, and lobbyists all meet in luxury and great secrecy. There are usually around 130 people in attendance, with 2/3 coming from Western Europe and 1/3 from North America. Governments usually provide the heavy security at taxpayers' expense, but nothing that is discussed is published for public consumption. None of those who attend is allowed to talk about the meetings. Indeed, they are sworn to secrecy before being allowed to attend. Since many powerful press barons attend, there is little risk of there being any publicity. So what did the Bilderbergers do at the meetings? Well, they certainly don't all simply drink whiskey, smoke cigars, and ogle waitresses in French maid costumes. These are heavy-duty elitist meetings at which important decisions are made. It is said that the euro was introduced as a result of a Bilderberg conference, and that the Trilateral Commission, a lobbying organization, was founded on the recommendation of a Rockefeller. The Bilderbergers are also credited with drafting the treaties of Rome, and there is little doubt that some aspects of Agenda 21 originated among conspirators attending these elite annual 3-day-long meetings. The Bilderbergers are a lobbying pressure group consisting entirely of rich and powerful individuals. Occasionally, there are leaks. So, at the Bilderberger conference in 1991, Henry Kissinger said that when faced with any sort of threat, be it terrorism, famine, or plague, people would accept tyranny as the excuse for safety. Today, some unexpected individuals are Bilderbergers. So, for example, Michael O'Leary, the boss of Ryanair, is on the Bilderberger committee. At the end of 2020, O'Leary's airline took a strong position by using the promotional phrase "jab and go" to encourage people to accept the recommended answer to the advertised crisis. That's a brilliant phrase there, the recommended answer to the advertised crisis. If you want to know more as well about Bilderberger, I got to recommend this book, which I just finished reading today. James Corbett's book, Reportage, Essays on the New World Order. There's a whole chapter in here. Let's see if I can get it, show you quickly the contents. Let's have a look. In the second half of the book, he has a whole chapter called Why We Must Oppose Bilderberg. I cannot recommend this book heartily enough. It is fantastic. It is really good. And I hope everybody on this call gets a copy. I also hope you all get a copy of Endgame as well. At least 3 people got in touch with me to say that they're going to buy the book, which is fantastic. I would really like more people to have copies of this floating around. It's very accessible, and it's got lots of breadcrumbs and threads to pull on. So, grab a copy. It won't break the bank, unlike some of the books on technocracy that we had a look at the intro to tonight's stream. So, let's see how many more B's we've got left. Maybe we'll just call it here, actually. Yeah, I don't think we're going to get all that done tonight, are we? We've hit 3 hours. Shall we just call it here? We'll do one more section. We'll do billionaires, because that ties in nicely to Bilderbergers. So, billionaires. This is the best time to be a billionaire. Between January 2020 and August 2020, most people in the world became increasingly impoverished. The world's billionaires, however, increased their wealth massively. Ah, yes. Fancy that. Even the so-called philanthropists ended up with far more money than they started with. Jeff Bezos made $80 billion during those months. Bill Gates made $8.4 billion. Zuckerberg made $21 billion. Elon Musk ended up richer by $62.8 billion. And Larry Page was richer by $9.6 billion. Mackenzie Scott gained $25.6 billion. I don't even know who he is. Eric Yuan improved his wealth by $10.4 billion. Don't even know who that is either. How nice it must be to be a billionaire in these difficult times. The billionaires are still doing extremely well out of a crisis which has been used as an excuse to destroy economies everywhere, damaging savings and taking jobs by the million. The wealth of billionaires in the US alone had increased by nearly $800 billion by the end of 2020. The world's richest 500 people, according to the Bloomberg Index, collectively gained 23%, or $1.3 trillion in 2020. The billionaires will continue to become ever richer because the New World Order is designed in part to fit their businesses. Their investments are in technology. They have well-stocked balance sheets. Their outgoings are minute, and yet their income has risen because their internet businesses are well-suited to a world in which people are locked in their homes and have little to do but spend their time online, often shopping. Electric cars are the fashionable flavor of the month, with the intensely hypocritical and ignorant global warming cultists because no one bothers to ask where the electricity is coming from, and no one worries about the 14-year-olds digging in the mines for the essential ingredients for the car batteries the cars require. It's also worth noting that by providing loans and grants to businesses, governments are quietly taking control of much of the economy. In the UK, the state is getting bigger and more powerful every day. Curiously, a Conservative government is nationalising everything it can lay its hands on. And the next part is biofuels and biomass, but we already learned a bit about that already on tonight's stream. So I think we will end the reading there. How's it going, everybody tuning in live? Hope you enjoyed that. We got Magus Kaiser over on Odyssey. Welcome back. You were here last week. It's good to see you again. And we had Timmy, Frank, Anna M on YouTube. So I hope you're all doing well. I'm really enjoying this book so far. Can't get my microphone in the right place. Yes, it's going well. I'm enjoying the book. I need to make my preamble rambles a bit shorter, I think. Otherwise, we're never going to get through it. So I'll try and come up with something a little shorter next week. But the technocracy introduction, I think, was useful. And I found some useful things in there that I hadn't noticed or thought of. And some connections that just put a new view on things, right? So Frank Lennon tells us that, if memory serves, Patrick Wood wrote to the effect that Scott ended up being exposed as a fraud and as a result disappeared from the scene entirely. Yeah, there was a bit about that on Wikipedia as well. So I'm looking forward to getting into Patrick Wood's work and his books. What else we got going on here? Frank says, the mad prices of books may well be linked to the degree of discourse related to given subject matters online. Yeah, I agree. When a lot of people start searching for the term technocracy and learning about it and paying attention to it, as happened in the last 5 years, the book prices shoot up. And when people such with big followings like James Corbett, Richard Grove, Jay Dyer, people I mentioned, when they start mentioning books, the prices go up. Alan Watt, same thing. When he mentioned books, the prices would go up. So, yeah, it's a real thing. Trevor McDonald says, I say thanks to my school years for teaching me to question authority and to deny it at will. Yeah, that's a blessing. Absolutely. You came out certainly better for that. That was a gift from your days at the school. And I'm glad that tendency to question authority remains. So that's great news. Over on Odyssey, what's going on here? ESB, how's it going? Says, that's a history document book I would like to listen to you read. I think you're talking about the pamphlet from Halderman. I would love to read that as well. I really would. Outside is Outlier says, I remember Vernon reading this all out on the net back in the day. And yes, he's a vegan. Yeah, I'm noticing that as I read it, I'm kind of like emulating his voice and his style of delivery because I can hear it in my mind as I'm reading the words. And of course, he would read this kind of stuff he would write it, type it out, and just read it word for word in the same way I'm doing now for a lot of his videos. They were kind of scripted in that sense. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting experiment to to be reading this, hearing his voice in my mind, emulating it as I'm going through it, and also points that he's making sound familiar because yeah, I've heard him mention these kind of topics before. Outside is Outlier says, I'm glad he's able to put videos again. Need to see him ASAP. It's been years now. He did have a big break, but he got a new book out. ESP is mentioning the book, The End of Medicine. Quote, due to abuse, lies, and libels from government and drug company agents, we have had to disable comments. Is that's on his new video, is it? I suppose that the disabled comments are because of the new video, maybe. Interesting. All right. I'm going to wrap it up, I think, and end it here. It's 9:10 on a Friday night. So thank you all for hanging out on your precious Friday and you know, just giving any time to this channel at all. It's deeply appreciated. It's an honor. I'm so grateful that people find value in this and check it out and come along for the ride, because it's a lot of fun. I enjoy doing it. And I think you are wonderful people for being so curious and for being willing to pay attention to this kind of stuff. Because it's not the easiest, most glorious, fun, entertaining, enthralling, thrilling stuff. But when we unearth these little connections and things start to make sense, it is pretty thrilling. I find it thrilling. As I said, I find this stuff way more interesting than watching TV nowadays. So hopefully you can pick up on some of that enthusiasm and get some benefit and value from me fumbling my way through these books, trying to understand the big picture. A huge shout out again to Vernon Coleman for saying that we can read through the book. VernonColeman.com is his website. His new video is in the comments description below this video, so go check that out. It's a good one. It's a long one. He makes some great points, and he's got a new book out. Please buy Endgame, The Hidden Agenda 21. Vernon, it's great. It's good. I'm enjoying it. It's really links to a lot of other books that we've already read, and it's witty, it's funny, it's entertaining to read. It's not just dry, boring academic history, names, dates, and things that happened. It's actually got a good bit of British humor in there, which I think we all need during these trying times. So thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight, and I wish you all a wonderful week. I'm going to be back next Friday. We're going to be continuing with a shorter preamble ramble and a longer bit of book reading. Otherwise, it's going to take us 10 videos to get through this. But that's the plan. So allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews if you want any of the links to where I hang out, social media, ways to donate. Send me an email, get in touch. It would be great to hear from you. Join Telegram, where you can vote on the upcoming books. I have some chat groups in there as well that I visit fairly regularly. Allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. Like, comment, share, subscribe if you think this kind of work is valuable. It all helps. So have a good one. And until next Friday, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and God bless.